What you're about to hear will make you never want to work the night shift again. 11 real people. 11 terrifying encounters. No fiction, no exaggeration, just pure nightmare fuel from those who punch in when everyone else is safely asleep. Radio DJs stalked through station windows. Hospital workers facing things that shouldn't move. Security guards discovering they're not alone in empty buildings. These aren't ghost stories. They're something much worse. They're true. Lock your doors, turn up the volume, and pray you never have to work alone in the dark. KWTX 104.7, you're listening to Midnight Confessions with Amelia. It's 1:47 a.m., and the phone lines are open for all you night owls out there. Amelia adjusted her headphones and glanced at the call board. 3 lines were blinking, which was pretty good for a Tuesday night in Millfield. The small-town radio station had been her home for the past 2 years, ever since she'd graduated with a communications degree and couldn't find work in the city. The overnight shift paid decently, and honestly, she'd grown to love the solitude. There was something peaceful about being the voice that kept insomniacs and shift workers company through the darkest hours. The studio was on the 2nd floor of an old brick building downtown, with large windows that overlooked Main Street. During the day, you could see the coffee shops and antique stores that kept the town's tourism alive. But at night, the street was empty except for the occasional police cruiser or delivery truck. Amelia liked the view. It made her feel connected to the sleeping town below, like she was watching over everyone. "Let's take our first caller," she said into the microphone, pressing the button for line 1. "You're on the air." "Hi, Amelia, this is Mike." The voice was deep, slightly gravelly, like he'd been smoking for years. "I've been listening to your show for a while now." "Thanks, Mike. What's keeping you up tonight?" "Oh, the usual. Work stress, can't seem to turn my brain off." There was a pause. "I really enjoy your voice, Amelia. It's very soothing." Something about the way he said her name made her skin crawl slightly, but she pushed the feeling aside. Late-night callers could be lonely, and sometimes they got a little too personal. It came with the territory. "Well, I'm glad I can help you relax. What kind of work do you do, Mike?" "I'm in security, night security. Like you, I'm awake when the rest of the world sleeps." Another pause, longer this time. Amelia, you look really pretty in that red sweater." Amelia's blood went cold. She was indeed wearing a red sweater, one she'd thrown on at the last minute because the station's heating was acting up again. Her eyes darted to the windows, but all she could see was the reflection of the studio lights against the dark glass. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" She managed, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your red sweater. It brings out your eyes, though I have to say, you look tired tonight. Maybe you should get more sleep." Amelia's hand moved instinctively to the call end button, but she hesitated. Maybe he'd seen her earlier, around town. Millfield was small enough that everyone knew everyone, and she was relatively recognizable as the local DJ. She forced herself to laugh. "Well, Mike, that's the nature of the night shift, isn't it? We sacrifice our sleep schedules for the greater good." She was stalling, trying to think. "How do you know what I'm wearing?" "I told you, Amelia. Security work. I see everything." His voice had changed subtly, becoming more confident, almost predatory. "You really should close those blinds when you're working alone. Anyone could be watching." This time, Amelia didn't hesitate. She cut the call and immediately went to the windows, pulling down the old Venetian blinds with shaking hands. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it over the soft hum of the equipment. She looked down at the street, scanning the shadows between the streetlights, but saw nothing unusual. Maybe she was overreacting. Maybe he'd just made a lucky guess about the sweater. Red was a common color, and it was October. Lots of people wore red in October. She tried to convince herself as she settled back into her chair, but her hands were still trembling slightly as she queued up the next song. 30 minutes later, line 2 lit up. KWTX, you're on the air. Amelia. It was the same voice. Mike. You didn't have to hang up on me. That was rude. Mike, I'm going to have to ask you not to call back. We have guidelines about appropriate... You closed the blinds, he interrupted. But you left the one by the back door open, the one that faces the alley. Amelia's stomach dropped. The back door was at the far end of the hallway, near the bathroom. There was a small window there, one she'd never even thought about because it was so small and high up. But if someone was in the alley, if they had climbed onto the dumpster or brought a ladder... Who is this? She whispered. I told you, I'm Mike. I work security. And right now, I'm working on securing you. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, you should check that back window, Amelia. You might find it interesting. Against every instinct screaming at her to stay put, Amelia found herself walking down the hallway toward the back of the building. The corridor was dimly lit by a single fluorescent bulb that flickered occasionally, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space, unnaturally loud in the silence. The window was exactly where she remembered it, a small rectangle of glass about 7 feet up the wall. She had to stand on her tiptoes to see out, and when she did, her legs nearly gave out beneath her. Written in the condensation on the outside of the glass, in letters that could only be seen from inside, was a message, "Beautiful show tonight." Amelia stumbled backward, her phone already in her hand, dialing 911. But as she pressed the call button, she heard something that made her blood freeze in her veins. The sound of a key turning in the back door lock. 911. What's your emergency? Someone's breaking into the radio station, Amelia whispered, backing toward the studio. KWTX on Main Street. I'm alone and someone's... The back door opened with a soft creak. Ma'am, are you still there? Amelia couldn't speak. She could hear footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate, moving toward the studio. She reached the studio door and slammed it shut, turning the lock just as the footsteps stopped right outside. A gentle knock. Amelia? Mike's voice, no longer coming through the phone, but through the door. Why don't you let me in? We were having such a nice conversation. The 911 operator was still talking, asking for more information, but Amelia could barely hear her over the sound of her own heartbeat. She looked around the studio desperately. The windows were now covered, but she was trapped. The only way out was through the door, and he was on the other side. The police are on their way, she called out, hoping her voice sounded braver than she felt. Are they? Mike sounded amused. That's interesting, because I've been listening to the police scanner all night. Seems like there's a big accident on the highway. Multi-car pileup. They're going to be busy for a while. As if to confirm his words, Amelia could hear sirens in the distance, but they were moving away from downtown, toward the highway. The doorknob turned slowly. You know, Amelia, I've been planning this for months. Listening to your show every night, learning your schedule, your habits. Did you know you always park in the same spot? Did you know you always leave your spare key under the fake rock by the back door? The key. She'd forgotten about the spare key. It had been there since before she started working at the station, left by the previous overnight DJ. She'd never thought to move it. "What do you want?" she asked, backing away from the door until she hit the console. "I want to meet you properly. I want to have a real conversation, face to face. I've been watching you for so long, Amelia. You're everything I thought you'd be." The lock clicked open. Amelia grabbed the fire extinguisher from the corner just as the door swung inward. Mike was exactly what she'd expected from his voice. Tall, thin, probably in his 40s, with hollow cheeks and eyes that reflected the studio lights like an animal's. He was wearing a security uniform, complete with a badge and radio, but something about it looked wrong, too clean, like a costume. "There you are," he said, stepping into the room. "You're even prettier up close." "Stay back," Amelia warned, raising the fire extinguisher. "The police aren't coming," Mike finished. "Not for a while, anyway. Don't worry, Amelia, I'm not going to hurt you. I just want to talk. I want to be on your show." He moved slowly around the studio, his eyes never leaving her face, taking in every detail of the space she'd made her own. The coffee mug with the chipped handle, the stack of CDs she kept meaning to organize, the photo of her family taped to the side of the console. "Nice setup you have here," he said conversationally. "Very cozy. Very intimate." He reached over and flipped the microphone switch. The on-air light glowed red. "Why don't we give your listeners a real show? Something they'll never forget." "Turn that off," Amelia demanded. But Mike was already settling into the guest chair across from her usual spot. "Good morning, night owls," he said into the microphone, his voice smooth and professional. "This is Mike, and I'm here with our lovely host Amelia for a very special segment of Midnight Confessions. Tell them how we met, Amelia." Amelia stared at him, the fire extinguisher still clutched in her hands. The red recording light seemed to pulse like a heartbeat, and she realized that whatever happened next would be broadcast live to anyone still listening. In a town like Millfield, that could be dozens of people. Maybe someone would hear and call for help. Or maybe Mike was counting on that. "We met," she said slowly, "when you started stalking me." Mike laughed, delighted. Such a dramatic way to put it. I prefer to think of it as getting to know you, learning your patterns, your fears. He leaned closer to the microphone. "Did you know that Amelia checks the back door exactly 3 times during her shift? Did you know she keeps a can of pepper spray in her purse, but never carries it with her to the studio? Did you know she talks to herself when she thinks no one is listening?" Each revelation was like a physical blow. Amelia realized just how long he'd been watching, how much he'd learned about her private moments, her vulnerabilities. "And did you know," Mike continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that the microphone barely caught, "that she's going to disappear tonight, and no one will ever find her?" That's when Amelia pulled the pin on the fire extinguisher and aimed it directly at his face. The chemical foam exploded outward, filling the studio with a white cloud that burned her eyes and throat. Mike screamed, clawing at his face, and Amelia ran. She burst through the studio door and down the hallway, not toward the back door where he'd entered, but toward the front of the building. Behind her, she could hear Mike stumbling around, cursing, his footsteps uneven as he tried to follow. The front door was locked from the inside. 3 deadbolts that her shaking fingers struggled to turn. 1, 2. The 3rd bolt stuck. "Amelia!" Mike's voice echoed from the hallway, closer than she'd expected. "That wasn't very nice." The bolt finally gave way, and Amelia burst out onto Main Street, screaming for help even though the street was empty. Her car was parked around the corner, but her keys were still upstairs in her purse. She ran, instead, toward the 24-hour diner 3 blocks away, her feet slapping against the cold pavement. She made it 2 blocks before she heard the car engine behind her. When the police finally found Mike's car abandoned near the highway, Amelia was long gone. The radio station was empty, except for the still-running equipment, broadcasting dead air to a town that would never sleep quite the same way again. The recording of that final segment was played once during the investigation, then sealed away in evidence. But sometimes, late at night, people swear they can still hear it bleeding through on 104.7. Mike's voice, smooth and professional, asking listeners if they've seen Amelia, describing exactly what she was wearing the last time anyone saw her alive. The red sweater that brought out her eyes. Let's move to our second story. Leo wiped down the counter for the 3rd time in an hour, his eyes constantly drifting to the security monitors showing the empty parking lot. Working the graveyard shift at a highway gas station wasn't exactly his dream job, but it paid for his textbooks and kept him awake for his early morning classes. Most nights were quiet. Truckers grabbing coffee, the occasional drunk needing directions, maybe a cop stopping by for a free cup, and some small talk. Tonight felt different. The first time he noticed the car was just a pair of headlights cruising slowly past the station around 1:30 a.m. Dark sedan, maybe a Honda or Toyota, moving at maybe 15 miles per hour in a 45 zone. Leo figured it was someone lost, looking for an address or trying to get their bearings. Happens all the time on Highway 67. People miss their exit and end up wandering around the back roads for hours. But then it came back. Same car, same slow speed. But this time it pulled into the far edge of the parking lot and just sat there. Engine running, headlights on, pointing toward the station. Leo couldn't see through the windshield. The angle was wrong, and the headlights created too much glare. But he could feel someone watching him through those beams of light. After about 10 minutes, the car pulled away. Leo shrugged it off, went back to restocking the cigarette display behind the counter. College kids drove by all the time, sometimes looking for parties or just killing time. Nothing unusual about that. Except the car came back 20 minutes later. Same spot, same routine. Headlights aimed directly at the store windows, like spotlights on a stage. This time, Leo grabbed the binoculars his manager kept under the register, supposedly for checking license plates on drive-offs, though Leo suspected Dave just used them for bird-watching during his day shifts. Through the binoculars, he could make out a figure in the driver's seat. Male, probably middle-aged, but the details were fuzzy through the dirty windshield and harsh lighting. What bothered Leo most was that the guy wasn't looking at his phone or a map. He was just sitting there, completely still, staring directly at the station. The car left again after 15 minutes, but Leo knew it would be back. He started paying closer attention to the security monitors, switching between the different camera angles. The system was old, and the image quality was terrible, but it covered most of the lot and both entrances. When the car returned for the 4th time, around 2:45 a.m., it parked closer to the building. Close enough that Leo could hear the engine idling through the glass doors. This time, the headlights went out, but the car stayed. Leo tried to look busy, organizing lottery tickets and cleaning the coffee machine, but his heart was beating faster now. He'd worked this shift for 8 months and had never seen anything like this. His phone showed no missed calls, no texts from friends who might be playing some kind of stupid prank. The highway was empty, except for an occasional semi-truck rumbling past in the distance. Leo was completely alone with whatever was happening in that parking lot. At 3:12 a.m., The car door opened. The man who stepped out was tall and lean, wearing dark clothes that made him almost invisible against the night. He moved with the careful, deliberate pace of someone who had planned every step. Leo watched through the monitor as the figure walked a slow circle around the entire building, disappearing from one camera and appearing on the next, like he was mapping the place. Leo's training kicked in. Dave had drilled him on robbery procedures during his first week. Keep calm. Don't be a hero. Give them whatever they want. Get them out as fast as possible. But this didn't feel like a robbery. Robbers came in fast and left faster. They didn't spend an hour casing a place that probably had less than $200 in the register. When the man finally approached the front entrance, Leo's mouth went dry. Through the glass doors, he could see him clearly for the first time. 40-something, clean-shaven, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. He looked completely ordinary, like someone's dad or a middle school teacher. But his eyes were wrong. Too focused, too intense, like he was seeing something Leo couldn't. The electronic chime sounded as the doors slid open. "Evening," the man said, his voice perfectly normal, even friendly. "Quiet night." "Yeah, pretty much," Leo replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can I help you with something?" "Just browsing." The man moved toward the snack aisles, but his eyes never stopped scanning the store. He was taking inventory, noting the locations of the cameras, the exits, the blind spots behind the tall shelving units. Leo had seen cops do the same thing, that automatic threat assessment that came from training or experience. But this guy wasn't a cop. "You work here alone?" the man asked, picking up a bag of chips and examining it like he'd never seen one before. "Most nights," Leo answered, immediately regretting it. Rule number 1 of working alone: never admit you're alone. That must get boring. Same routine every night, same people coming and going. The man moved to the beverage coolers, the fluorescent lights reflecting off the glass doors as he opened and closed them without taking anything. "You probably know everyone who stops by regularly. Truckers, locals, late-night commuters, I guess." Leo's hand drifted toward the panic button under the counter, the one connected directly to the sheriff's department. But the man wasn't threatening him, wasn't demanding money or acting aggressive. He was just talking. "I've been driving this route for weeks now," the man continued, moving closer to the counter. "Always see you here, always alone. Very dedicated employee." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Very predictable schedule." The words hit Leo like a physical blow. This wasn't random. This wasn't someone passing through or looking for directions. This man had been watching him, studying him, learning his patterns. The slow drives past the station, the parking lot surveillance. It had all been preparation for this moment. "Look, if you're not buying anything," Leo started, but the man cut him off. "Oh, but I am buying something." He placed the bag of chips on the counter, along with a candy bar and a bottle of water. Normal purchases, the kind of transaction Leo handled dozens of times per shift. Just getting to know the neighborhood. As Leo rang up the items, the man leaned against the counter, close enough that Leo could smell his cologne and see the details of his clothing. Everything about him was carefully chosen. The jacket had multiple pockets, the boots were steel-toed, the watch was military style. This wasn't casual dress. This was gear. "You know what I find interesting about places like this?" the man said, handing Leo a $20 bill. "They're perfect little islands of light in the darkness. You can see everything that's happening inside from outside, but the people inside can't see what's waiting for them in the dark." Leo's hands were shaking as he made change. Through the window behind the man, he could see the empty parking lot, the dark highway beyond, the vast emptiness that surrounded this tiny pool of fluorescent light. For the first time, he realized how exposed he was, how vulnerable. Anyone could be out there, watching, waiting, planning. "Here's your change," Leo managed, placing the bills on the counter rather than handing them over directly. The man pocketed the money without counting it, picked up his purchases, and headed for the door. But at the threshold, he turned back. "See you tomorrow night, Leo." Leo's blood froze. He'd never told the man his name. His name tag was pinned to his shirt, but it was small, and the man had never been close enough to read it clearly. Unless he'd been watching Leo for much longer than just tonight. Unless he knew more about Leo than just his work schedule. The electronic chimes sounded as the doors closed, and Leo watched through the monitors as the man walked back to his car with the same deliberate pace. But instead of getting in and driving away, he stood beside the vehicle for a long moment, looking directly at the security camera mounted above the front entrance. He raised one hand in a small wave, then got in his car and left. Leo immediately called 911, but what could he tell them? A customer had made him uncomfortable? Someone had bought snacks and said goodbye? The dispatcher took his information and promised to have a patrol car swing by, but Leo could hear the skepticism in her voice. He sounded paranoid, jumpy, like a kid afraid of shadows. But Leo knew what he'd seen. The man's eyes when he'd said, "See you tomorrow night." The way he'd moved through the store like he was mapping it for future use. The careful selection of clothing and gear. This wasn't over. This was just the beginning. When Leo's replacement arrived for the morning shift, he was still sitting behind the counter, the baseball bat Dave kept in the back office now lying across his lap. He hadn't moved from that spot in 4 hours, hadn't even gone to the bathroom, because leaving the counter meant turning his back on those glass doors and the parking lot beyond. Leo quit that morning, walked out the door, and never came back. But sometimes, late at night when he's driving past Highway 67 on his way home from his new job at a 24-hour diner downtown, he sees a dark sedan parked at the edge of the gas-and-go parking lot. Just sitting there, engine running, headlights pointed at the windows where someone else now works the graveyard shift alone. And Leo knows that the man is still out there, still watching, still waiting for the perfect moment to finish whatever he started that night. Because some customers don't just buy snacks and leave. Some customers are shopping for something else entirely. Something that can't be found on the shelves. Let's move to our third story. The basement of St. Mary's General Hospital was a place most people tried never to think about. 3 floors below the bustling emergency room and the cheerful pediatric ward, past the laundry facilities and the storage rooms filled with medical supplies, lay the morgue. It was a necessary part of the hospital ecosystem, but one that existed in careful isolation from the world of the living above. Marcus Rivera had been working as a night morgue technician for 6 months, and he'd grown comfortable with the solitude. The job paid well for someone with just a 2-year mortuary science degree, and the overnight shift meant he rarely had to deal with grieving families or curious medical students. Most nights, his duties were simple. Maintain the refrigeration units, complete paperwork for pending autopsies, and ensure that the deceased were properly stored and cataloged. The morgue could hold 12 bodies in individual refrigerated drawers, each one temperature-controlled and equipped with a secure locking mechanism. The system was state-of-the-art, installed just 2 years ago after the old units had finally given out. Everything was computerized now, with digital displays showing the temperature and status of each compartment. It was efficient, reliable, and designed to eliminate human error. Which was why Marcus was so confused when drawer 7 kept opening. It started on a Tuesday night around 2:30 a.m. Marcus was updating intake records on his computer when he heard the familiar mechanical hum of a drawer extending. He looked up from his desk to see drawer 7 sliding open, its steel surface gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. The computer screen showed all systems normal. No alerts, no mechanical failures indicated. Marcus walked over and checked the drawer. Empty, as expected. They'd had a light week and were only storing 4 bodies total, none of them in compartment 7. He pushed the drawer closed until he heard the satisfying click of the locking mechanism engaging, then returned to his paperwork. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Same drawer, same slow mechanical extension, same soft hum of the motors. This time, Marcus checked the computer logs more carefully. According to the system, drawer 7 had never opened. No commands had been issued, no temperature fluctuations detected, no error codes generated. As far as the computer was concerned, nothing had happened. But Marcus had seen it with his own eyes. He called maintenance, left a voicemail about a possible malfunction in Unit 7. Then he wedged a pen between the drawer and the frame, just enough to prevent it from extending fully if something triggered it again. The pen would fall out if the drawer tried to open, giving him physical evidence that he wasn't imagining things. An hour later, he found the pen on the floor and drawer 7 extended 6 inches from its housing. Marcus spent the rest of his shift running diagnostics on the system, checking electrical connections, examining the mechanical components he could access. Everything appeared normal. The drawer responded correctly to manual commands, the temperature remained stable, and the locking mechanism engaged properly when closed. But twice more before dawn, the drawer opened on its own. The maintenance crew arrived the next afternoon and spent 3 hours examining Unit 7. They found nothing wrong. The lead technician, a guy named Pete who'd been servicing morgue equipment for 20 years, suggested it might be a software glitch in the new computer system. These things happen sometimes with digital controls, phantom commands generated by electromagnetic interference or corrupted memory. Happens more than you'd think, Pete assured Marcus. We'll update the firmware and run a full system calibration. Should fix whatever's causing the ghost in the machine. But Marcus knew this wasn't a software problem. Because on Wednesday night, when drawer 7 opened for the 5th time, he'd been staring directly at the computer screen. No commands had been issued. No error messages appeared. According to the digital readout, drawer 7 remained securely closed even as Marcus watched it slide open 6 inches, pause for exactly 30 seconds, then slowly retract. That's when Marcus decided to check the security footage. St. Mary's had cameras throughout the hospital, including one in the morgue positioned to monitor the main work area. The system kept digital recordings for 30 days before automatically deleting them to make space for new footage. Marcus had access to the morgue camera as part of his security clearance. Sometimes families or attorneys requested verification of proper handling procedures, so the technicians needed to be able to review relevant footage. What Marcus saw on the Wednesday night recording made his blood run cold. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m., just before the first time drawer 7 had opened. On the grainy security footage, Marcus could see himself sitting at the computer, updating records. The morgue looked exactly as he remembered it. Quiet, empty, sterile. Then drawer 7 began to extend, just as it had in real life. But on the security camera, the drawer wasn't empty. There was a shape inside it. Human-sized, covered by what appeared to be a standard morgue sheet, but clearly occupied. Marcus watched his recorded self walk over to the drawer, look inside and close it again. But in the recording, his past self's expression was different than he remembered. Instead of confusion, his face showed recognition, even acknowledgement, like he was looking at someone he knew. Marcus rewound the footage and watched it again. Same result. According to the security camera, Drawer 7 contained a body that Marcus had somehow failed to see or remember. A body that had been pulling itself partially out of storage over and over again throughout the night. Marcus checked the intake logs, cross-referenced them with the morgue inventory system, even called the day shift supervisor to verify the current occupancy. 4 bodies total, stored in drawers 1, 3, 8, and 11. Drawer 7 was empty and had been empty for over a week. But the security footage told a different story. Thursday night, Marcus arrived for his shift with a plan. He set up his personal laptop with a direct view of Drawer 7, started recording with a built-in camera. If something was wrong with the hospital security system, if there was some kind of digital corruption affecting the footage, his own recording would show the truth. The first opening occurred at 1:45 a.m. Marcus watched it happen in real time. Drawer 7 extending slowly, staying open for exactly 30 seconds, then retracting. His laptop camera captured everything perfectly. Empty drawer, mechanical malfunction, nothing more. But when Marcus reviewed the hospital security footage from that same time period, he saw the impossible again. A body in the drawer, covered by a sheet, and his own face showing that strange expression of recognition as he approached to close it. In the security footage, the body sat up as Marcus approached. Marcus stumbled backward from the computer, his chair rolling across the tile floor until it hit the wall. On the screen, his recorded self was having a conversation with the figure in the drawer. He appeared calm, even friendly, nodding and gesturing like he was catching up with an old friend. The conversation lasted for several minutes before the figure lay back down and Marcus closed the drawer. Marcus had no memory of any conversation. He remembered checking an empty drawer and feeling confused about the mechanical malfunction. But according to the security camera, he'd spent 10 minutes talking to someone who shouldn't have been there. Someone who, according to every official record, wasn't there. Marcus fast-forwarded through the rest of the night's footage. Each time Drawer 7 opened, the same scene played out. The body would sit up. Marcus would approach. They would have a brief interaction. Then the drawer would close. But Marcus's memory of each incident involved only an empty drawer and growing frustration with the malfunctioning equipment. That's when Marcus realized the most terrifying possibility of all. What if Drawer 7 wasn't malfunctioning? What if it was being opened from the inside? And what if Marcus's memory of those interactions was being somehow suppressed or altered? What if he was having conversations with the dead and forgetting them immediately afterward? Marcus pulled up the intake records for the past month, looking for anyone who might have been stored in Drawer 7. 3 weeks ago, a John Doe had been brought in from a car accident on Highway 67. Mid-30s, no identification, no family to claim the body. He'd been stored in Drawer 7 for 5 days while the police investigated, then transferred to the county morgue when St. Mary's needed the space. Marcus found the transfer paperwork, but something was wrong with it. The signature section was blank. The county morgue had no record of receiving the body. And when Marcus called the day shift supervisor who had supposedly handled the transfer, the man claimed no knowledge of any John Doe from a Highway 67 accident. It was as if the body had simply vanished from the records, erased from official memory, just as Marcus's conversations with him were being erased from personal memory. Friday night. Marcus came to work with a digital voice recorder hidden in his shirt pocket. If he was having conversations, he couldn't remember. At least, he could document them. He also brought a printed copy of John Doe's original intake photo, the one taken when the body first arrived. When drawer 7 opened at 2:22 a.m., Marcus was ready. He approached the drawer as he had every night that week, but this time he forced himself to really look, to see past whatever was making him forget. And there, lying on the cold steel surface, was the man from the photograph. Exactly as he'd appeared 3 weeks ago, unchanged by time or decomposition. The man's eyes opened when Marcus leaned over the drawer. "Hello, Marcus," the corpse said, its voice dry and hollow, but perfectly clear. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Marcus's hand went instinctively to the voice recorder, making sure it was still running. "Who are you?" "You know who I am. You've seen my file." The dead man sat up slowly, the morgue sheet falling away from his gray skin. "Car accident on Highway 67. But it wasn't an accident, Marcus. Someone ran me off the road, left me to die in that ditch." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're the only one who can still see me. The only one who remembers, even for a little while." The corpse swung its legs over the side of the drawer, feet touching the cold tile floor. "They tried to erase me completely, remove my body, delete my records, make it like I never existed. But some part of me is still here, still fighting to be remembered." Marcus looked around the morgue, suddenly understanding. "The security footage. You're not really there. I'm not really talking to you. Aren't you?" The dead man smiled, and Marcus could see the massive head trauma that had killed him, the crushed skull and damaged brain tissue. "Does it matter what's real if the truth gets told?" "What truth?" "The man who killed me. He's still out there, still hunting. Highway 67, late at night, looking for travelers who won't be missed." The corpse reached out and touched Marcus's arm with fingers that felt like ice. "You have to remember this conversation, Marcus. You have to tell someone what happened to me." "I won't remember," Marcus said, feeling the familiar fog beginning to cloud his thoughts. "I never remember." "You will this time," the dead man promised. "Because this time, you're recording it." Marcus looked down at the voice recorder in his hand, its red light still blinking steadily. The conversation was being documented, preserved in a way that couldn't be erased or forgotten. "Tell them to look for the others," the corpse whispered as it lay back down on the drawer. "The ones who went missing on Highway 67. Tell them John Doe from the car accident wants justice." The drawer began to retract, and Marcus stepped back, watching as it slid smoothly into its housing. The mechanical hum faded to silence, and the morgue returned to its normal state of sterile quiet. But this time, Marcus didn't forget. When he played back the voice recording later that morning, he expected to hear only his own voice talking to empty air. Instead, he heard every word of the conversation exactly as he remembered it. The dead man's voice, hollow and desperate, pleading for justice. The details about Highway 67, about being run off the road, about other missing travelers. Marcus took the recording to the police. At first, they dismissed it as either a hoax or evidence of a psychological breakdown. But when they ran a search for missing persons along Highway 67, they found a pattern. 7 people in the past year, all last seen traveling that stretch of highway late at night. All reported missing, but their cases had been shuffled between jurisdictions, lost in bureaucratic confusion, forgotten. Just like John Doe had been forgotten. The investigation that followed uncovered a serial killer who had been using the isolated highway as his hunting ground, targeting travelers who wouldn't be immediately missed. The man was finally caught when police set up a sting operation based on John Doe's description of the killer's methods. Marcus never saw the corpse again after that final conversation. Drawer 7 never opened on its own anymore, and the security footage returned to normal. But sometimes, when he's working alone in the morgue late at night, Marcus can feel a presence watching him from the empty drawers. Not threatening or malevolent, but grateful. The presence of the dead who know that someone, finally, is listening to their stories. And Marcus has learned that sometimes the most important conversations you'll ever have are with people who are supposed to be silent forever. Let's move to our fourth story. David Martinez had been cleaning the Meridian Financial Tower for 3 years, and he thought he knew every sound the building made. The hum of the HVAC system cycling on and off, the ping of elevator doors opening on empty floors, the occasional creak of steel and concrete settling as the temperature dropped during the night hours. After midnight, the 40-story building became his domain, a vertical city of empty offices and darkened conference rooms that he navigated with the efficiency of long practice. But lately, the building had been making new sounds. It started about 2 weeks ago on the 32nd floor, home to Hartwell and Associates, a mid-sized accounting firm. David was emptying trash cans in the cubicle maze when he heard it, the distinctive clicking of computer keyboards. Not just 1 or 2 keys being pressed accidentally, but the steady rhythm of someone typing, the sound echoing through the darkened office space. David stopped pushing his cart and listened. The typing continued for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped abruptly. He walked toward the sound, following the maze of cubicles toward the back corner of the floor. All the computers were shut down, their monitors dark, the workstations neat and organized, just as the employees had left them hours earlier. David shrugged it off. Old buildings made strange sounds, especially at night when the temperature differential put stress on the structure. Maybe it was pipes settling, or the building's steel frame adjusting to the cooler air. He'd worked enough night shifts to know that isolation and silence could make your imagination run wild. But the next night, it happened again. Same floor, same time, around 1:15 a.m. But this time the typing seemed to come from multiple locations. David could hear the staccato rhythm of keyboards from at least 3 different areas of the floor, overlapping and creating a symphony of phantom productivity. When he investigated, he found the same thing. Dark monitors, powered-down computers, empty chairs. On the 3rd night, David brought a flashlight and moved more carefully through the Hartwell and Associates office. The typing started right on schedule, and this time David was able to pinpoint one of the sources. Cubicle 32C, belonging to someone named Jennifer Walsh, according to the nameplate on the desk. The keyboard clicking was coming from directly above her workstation, but when David shined his flashlight on the desk, the keyboard wasn't moving. The sound was there, clear and unmistakable, but the keys weren't being pressed. David reached out and touched the keyboard. The clicking stopped immediately, like someone had been caught in the act. But after a few seconds of silence, it started up again, this time from a cubicle on the other side of the floor. That's when David decided to check the building's computer logs. As part of his security clearance, David had access to the overnight monitoring system that tracked building access, environmental controls, and basic network activity. He wasn't supposed to dig too deep into the computer systems, but his curiosity was stronger than his caution. What he found in the network logs made his blood run cold. According to the system records, multiple computers on the 32nd floor were logging activity between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. every night. Not just random system maintenance or automated backups, but actual user activity. Documents being opened, emails being composed, spreadsheets being modified. The logs showed login times, file access records, even keystroke counts. But according to the building's physical access system, no one had badged into the 32nd floor after 6:30 p.m. for the past 2 weeks. David cross-referenced the computer activity with the employee directory. The accounts showing overnight usage belonged to Jennifer Walsh, Marcus Chen, Sandra Rodriguez, and Thomas Mitchell, 4 Hartwell and Associates employees who, according to the company's HR records, had all died in a car accident 3 weeks earlier. They'd been driving back from a client meeting in another city when their vehicle hit black ice and went off a mountain highway. All 4 were killed instantly. The funeral had been held on a Friday. David remembered because building management had sent flowers and closed the 32nd floor for the day as a mark of respect. But apparently, someone had forgotten to tell the dead employees that they didn't need to come to work anymore. David spent the rest of that night researching everything he could find about the 4 deceased workers. Jennifer Walsh had been an audit manager, known for staying late to perfect her reports. Marcus Chen was a senior accountant who often worked through the night during tax season. Sandra Rodriguez handled client communications and was notorious for answering emails at all hours. Thomas Mitchell was a junior analyst who lived and breathed spreadsheets. All 4 had been dedicated employees, the kind who ate lunch at their desks and checked emails from home on weekends. Their entire lives had revolved around their work, their identities defined by their professional achievements. The kind of people who might not know how to stop working, even in death. The next night, David decided to test his theory. Instead of just listening to the phantom typing, he went directly to Jennifer Walsh's cubicle and sat down at her desk. The computer was shut down, the monitor dark, but David could feel a presence in the empty chair beside him. The air was colder here, and there was a faint smell of the vanilla perfume Jennifer had worn every day, according to her co-workers. "Jennifer," David whispered into the darkness. "Are you here?" The typing sound stopped throughout the entire floor. The silence was so complete that David could hear his own heartbeat, the distant hum of the building's machinery, the faint whistle of wind against the windows, 40 stories up. Then, slowly, the computer monitor flickered to life. The screen showed Jennifer's desktop exactly as she'd left it 3 weeks ago. Her background photo, a picture of her cat named Mr. Whiskers, smiled out from behind an array of work-related icons. The computer's clock showed the correct time, 1:23 a.m. But according to the network logs, this computer had been powered down since the day Jennifer died. A Microsoft Word document opened on the screen. Slowly, letter by letter, words began to appear. "Thank you for noticing us, David." David's hands were shaking as he reached for the keyboard. He typed a response. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The words appeared on the screen faster now, as if Jennifer was gaining confidence. "We don't understand what happened. One day we were driving back from the Morrison account meeting, and the next day we were here, but no one could see us. We've been trying to finish our work, but nothing saves properly. The files disappear when we try to submit them. You died in a car accident," David typed gently. 3 weeks ago. The whole company mourned for you." There was a long pause. Then, "That's impossible. We have the Morrison audit due Monday. Sandra hasn't finished the client presentation. Marcus is in the middle of quarterly reconciliations. We can't be dead. We have too much work to do." David looked around the darkened office, understanding now why the phantom typing had been so persistent. These 4 people had been so consumed by their jobs, so defined by their professional responsibilities, that death itself couldn't convince them to stop working. From across the office, He could hear keyboards clicking as the other 3 employees continued their eternal attempts to complete projects that would never be finished. The work isn't important anymore, David typed. You need to let go. Your families are grieving. Your co-workers miss you. But they don't need you to keep working. But who will handle the Morrison account? Who will finish the quarterly reports? The company needs us. The company will survive, David assured her. Other people will do the work. That's how it works. People leave, new people come in. The work continues. But you don't have to carry that burden anymore. The screen was quiet for several minutes. David could hear the typing from other cubicles growing slower, more hesitant, as if the other 3 were listening to the conversation. Finally, Jennifer's words appeared again. We've been so scared, David. Scared that if we stop working, we'll disappear completely. That we'll be forgotten. That our lives won't have mattered. Your lives mattered, David typed, tears blurring his vision. But they mattered because of who you were, not just what you did for work. Jennifer, you had Mr. Whiskers and those terrible romance novels you kept hidden in your desk drawer. Marcus, you had that photo of your daughter's soccer team. Sandra, you remembered everyone's birthday and always brought homemade cookies. Thomas, you played guitar at open mic nights and dreamed of starting a band. The typing sounds from the other cubicles had stopped completely now. The entire floor was silent, except for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights. How did you know about the romance novels? I clean the desks every night. David smiled as he typed. I see everything, and I remember all of you as people, not just employees. You were good people who worked hard, but you were so much more than your jobs. I miss Mr. Whiskers. Is someone taking care of him? David pulled out his phone and did a quick search. Your sister adopted him. She posts pictures on Facebook. He looks happy and well-fed. That's good. He always was a chunky cat. There was another pause, then. David, will you tell our family something for us? Of course. Tell them we love them. Tell them we're sorry we worked so much that we forgot to live. Tell them they don't need to visit our graves so often. We're not there anymore. We're somewhere else now. Somewhere peaceful. I'll tell them, David promised. And David, thank you for listening to us, for seeing us when no one else could. You're a good man. The computer screen began to flicker, the image growing fainter and more unstable. One by one, the other computers on the floor powered up, their screens glowing in the darkness. David could see documents opening, final messages being typed by invisible hands. Marcus's computer. Tell my daughter I'm proud of her. Tell her to follow her dreams, not mine. Sandra's computer. My cookies recipe is in my desk. Share it at the office parties. Food brings people together. Thomas's computer. Keep making music. The world needs more songs, not more spreadsheets. The messages remained on the screens for exactly 1 minute. Then all 4 computers shut down simultaneously. The monitors went dark, the hard drive spun down, and the phantom typing sounds ceased forever. David sat in the darkness for a long time, surrounded by the empty cubicles and silent workstations. The building felt different now, not haunted or oppressive, but peaceful. Like a weight had been lifted, a burden finally set aside. The next morning, David called in sick and spent the day tracking down the families of the 4 deceased employees. He delivered their final messages, shared the small personal details that proved their loved ones had been more than just their jobs. The conversations were difficult, but necessary, bringing closure to people who had been struggling to understand their losses. Jennifer's sister cried when David told her about Mr. Whiskers and the romance novels. Marcus's daughter laughed through her tears when she heard about her father's pride in her independence. Sandra's husband smiled when David mentioned the cookie recipe. Thomas's bandmates were amazed to learn he'd been thinking about music even in death. David never heard the phantom typing again. The 32nd floor returned to its normal, nighttime quiet, with only the usual building sounds to keep him company as he cleaned. But sometimes, when he was emptying the trash cans in the Hartwell and Associates office, he would pause at the 4 empty cubicles and whisper a quiet "good night" to the spaces where dedicated employees had once worked themselves to death. And in the silence that followed, David could swear he heard something that sounded almost like contentment. The peaceful quiet of people who had finally learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply rest. The building logs never showed unauthorized computer activity again. But Human Resources reported that productivity in the Hartwell and Associates office had somehow improved, with employees leaving work on time and taking their vacation days, as if the tragedy of their co-workers' deaths had taught everyone a valuable lesson about the difference between working to live and living to work. Some lessons, David realized, are too important to stay buried with the dead. Let's move to our 5th story. Elena Rodriguez had always loved the smell of fresh bread. But at 3:17 a.m. in the basement of Sunrise Bakery, surrounded by industrial ovens that glowed like hungry mouths in the darkness, even the most comforting aromas couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She'd been working the overnight shift for 8 months, arriving at 2:30 a.m. to begin the day's first batch of artisan loaves and pastries that would be ready when the bakery opened at 7 a.m. It was solitary work. Just her and the massive mixers, the proof boxes, and the bank of ovens that could bake 60 loaves at a time. Most nights, she enjoyed the peace and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful in the pre-dawn hours while the rest of the city slept. But tonight, someone had been living in her sanctuary. Elena first noticed it when she went to the storage room to retrieve flour. The 50-pound bags were arranged differently than she'd left them the night before, stacked to create a small enclosed space in the back corner. When she moved them aside to investigate, she found a makeshift bed, old bakery towels folded into a pillow, a tattered blanket that looked like it had been stolen from a donation bin, and a collection of empty food containers. Someone had been sleeping here, eating here, making themselves at home in the commercial bakery's storage area. Elena's first instinct was to call the police, but she hesitated. The bed looked like it belonged to someone desperate, not dangerous. The food containers were from the bakery's day-old items that would have been thrown away anyway. Whoever was living here wasn't stealing valuable inventory. They were surviving on scraps. But as Elena explored the storage room more carefully, she found things that made her reconsider her sympathy. Photographs, dozens of them, printed on regular copy paper and taped to the walls in the dark space behind the flour bags. Pictures of Elena working through the bakery's windows, taken from the alley outside. Pictures of her arriving for work, leaving in the morning, even some that appeared to have been taken inside the bakery while she worked alone. Elena's hands shook as she examined the photos. Some were recent, from just a few days ago. Others looked older, maybe from when she'd first started working the overnight shift. This person hadn't just recently started living in the storage room. They'd been watching her for months, documenting her routines, studying her habits. At the bottom of the photo collection, Elena found a notebook filled with handwritten entries. Pages and pages of observations about her work schedule, her personal habits, even details about her life outside the bakery. The writing was neat and methodical, like scientific field notes. Elena arrives between 2:28 and 2:35 a.m. Parks in the same spot every night. Always checks the ovens first, then starts with the sourdough starter, takes her first break at 4:15 a.m., goes outside to smoke a cigarette in the alley. Never locks the back door when she goes out for smoke breaks. Elena wears her hair up when working with the dough mixers, but lets it down during break times. She talks to herself while she works, usually about her daughter Sophia's school problems or her ex-husband's late child support payments. She doesn't know how beautiful she is when she concentrates on shaping the croissants. Elena keeps a photo of Sophia taped inside her locker. Sophia is 7 years old, attends Roosevelt Elementary, takes the bus home at 3:15 p.m. on weekdays. Elena picks her up from after-school care at 6 p.m. every day except Fridays, when Sophia stays with her grandmother. The notebook entries went on for pages, documenting every aspect of Elena's life with obsessive detail. Whoever had written this knew more about her daily routine than her own family did, and they'd been watching her daughter. Elena's phone was in her hand, 911 already dialed, when she heard the back door open. The bakery had 2 entrances, the main storefront that faced the street and a service door in the back alley where deliveries were made. Elena always used the back entrance for her overnight shift, and she always locked it behind her. But according to the notebook, she never locked it when she went outside for smoke breaks. Except Elena had quit smoking 2 months ago. The footsteps in the main bakery were careful and deliberate, like someone who knew exactly how to move through the space without making noise. Elena crouched behind the flour bags, clutching her phone, trying to control her breathing as the footsteps came closer to the storage room. Elena. The voice was male, middle-aged, surprisingly gentle. I know you're here. I saw the lights on. Elena pressed herself deeper into the shadows, praying that her hiding spot behind the makeshift bed would keep her concealed. I'm not going to hurt you. The voice continued, closer now, just outside the storage room door. I just want to talk. I've been wanting to meet you properly for so long. Through a gap between the flour bags, Elena could see a figure silhouetted in the storage room doorway. Tall, thin, wearing dark clothes that helped him blend into the shadows. He had something in his hand, a flashlight or maybe a weapon, she couldn't tell. I know this looks bad, the man said, stepping into the storage room. The photos, the notebook. But I want you to understand that everything I've done has been out of love. I've been protecting you, Elena, watching over you while you work alone in this dangerous neighborhood. He moved deeper into the storage room, and Elena could see his face now in the dim light from the main bakery. He looked like someone's father or uncle, completely ordinary, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance, which somehow made him more terrifying than if he'd looked like a monster. I know about your ex-husband, he continued, his voice taking on an intimate tone that made Elena's skin crawl. I know he hasn't been paying child support. I know you've been struggling to make ends meet, working this overnight job so you can be home when Sophia gets out of school. You're such a good mother, Elena. Such a strong woman. The man was getting closer to her hiding spot, following a systematic search pattern through the storage room. Elena realized he would find her within minutes unless she did something. I can help you, he said, his voice now uncomfortably close. I have money saved up. I could take care of you and Sophia. We could be a family. I know you're lonely, Elena. I see how sad you look sometimes when you think no one is watching. But someone had been watching. This man had been watching her for months, learning her vulnerabilities, planning for this moment when he would reveal himself and expect her to be grateful for his twisted version of protection. Elena looked at her phone. The call to 911 was still connected, but she'd never pressed send. She could hear the operator's faint voice asking if anyone was there. Very carefully, trying not to make any sound, Elena pressed the send button. 911, what's your emergency? Sunrise Bakery, Elena whispered as quietly as possible. Someone broke in. He's been stalking me. Ma'am, I can barely hear you. Can you speak louder? Elena? The man's voice was sharp now, suspicious. Who are you talking to? Elena burst from her hiding spot and ran toward the storage room door, but the man was faster. He grabbed her arm as she passed, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who looked so ordinary. You called the police, he said, and for the first time, his voice carried real anger. That was a mistake, Elena. I was trying to do this the nice way. Elena twisted in his grip and kicked him in the shin, breaking free long enough to reach the main bakery area. But he was right behind her, and the space that had always felt like her personal sanctuary now felt like a maze designed to trap her. The industrial mixers and work tables that she navigated with ease during normal operations now became obstacles as she tried to reach the front door. Behind her, she could hear the man moving with the confidence of someone who had spent hours studying the layout of the bakery. You can't run from me forever, Elena, he called out. I know this place better than you do. I know all your hiding spots. Elena reached the front counter and grabbed the landline phone, but the man appeared beside her before she could dial. He yanked the phone cord from the wall and smiled at her with the patient expression of someone explaining something to a slow child. The police won't get here in time, he said calmly. And even if they do, what are they going to arrest me for? I haven't hurt you. I haven't stolen anything. I've been homeless, sleeping in an unused storage room, trying to survive. It's not a crime, Elena. He was right, and they both knew it. The photos and the notebook were creepy, but they might not be enough to prove stalking in court. He'd been careful, staying just on the legal side of obsession. But Sophia, Elena said, desperation creeping into her voice. You wrote about my daughter. You know her schedule, her school. I was protecting her too, the man replied. Do you know how dangerous it is for a little girl to walk home alone? Do you know what kinds of people are out there waiting to hurt innocent children? I've been watching Sophia's route home from school, making sure she's safe. The casual way he mentioned watching her 7-year-old daughter made Elena's vision blur with rage. This man had been stalking her child, following Sophia to and from school, and he had the audacity to frame it as protection. Elena grabbed a rolling pin from the counter and swung it at the man's head, but he caught her wrist easily. Now, that wasn't very nice, he said, twisting her arm until she dropped the makeshift weapon. I'm trying to have a civilized conversation with you, Elena. I'm trying to explain how much I care about you and Sophia, how I can make your lives better. That's when Elena remembered the industrial ovens. The bakery's main ovens were designed to reach temperatures over 500 degrees Fahrenheit, and she'd preheated them before discovering the intruder. They were now hot enough to bake bread, which meant they were hot enough to cause serious injury. Elena pretended to stumble backward, drawing the man closer to the bank of ovens. He followed her, still talking in that calm, reasonable voice about how he could provide for her family, how they could be happy together. All I'm asking for is a chance, he said, reaching out to touch her face with a gentleness that was somehow more terrifying than violence would have been. Let me show you how good I can be to you. Elena grabbed the handle of the largest oven and yanked the door open. A wave of superheated air rushed out, and she shoved the man toward the opening with all her strength. He stumbled backward, his shirt catching fire as his back hit the edge of the oven door. The man screamed, a sound of pure agony that echoed through the bakery as he rolled on the floor, trying to extinguish the flames. Elena didn't wait to see if he was seriously injured. She ran for the back door, bursting into the alley just as police sirens became audible in the distance. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, followed by an ambulance and a fire truck. The man survived, though he spent 3 weeks in the hospital's burn unit. The police found enough evidence in his apartment. More photos, detailed plans of Elena's daily routine, maps of Sophia's school and walking routes, to charge him with stalking, breaking and entering, and attempted kidnapping. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but Elena knew he would be released eventually. Elena never returned to the overnight shift at Sunrise Bakery. She found a day job at a different bakery across town, one with better security and more foot traffic. She moved to a new apartment, enrolled Sophia in a different school, and changed their routines completely. But sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, Elena would think about how close she'd come to becoming another victim. How the man had been watching her for months, learning her patterns, planning his approach with the patience of a predator. And she would remember the most chilling part of the whole experience. How normal he'd looked. How reasonable he'd sounded. How easily he could have been mistaken for a concerned neighbor or a helpful stranger. The kind of person who could be anyone, anywhere. Watching from the shadows and waiting for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. Elena installed security cameras around her new home and taught Sophia never to walk anywhere alone. Because she'd learned that the most dangerous predators aren't the ones who look like monsters. They're the ones who look like everyone else, who blend into the background until the moment they decide to step into the light. And by then, it's almost always too late to run. Let's move to our 6th story. Jake Morrison had worked security for 12 years, but nothing had prepared him for the Westfield shopping center after dark. The mall had been closed for 18 months, a casualty of online shopping and changing consumer habits. But the property management company still required overnight security to prevent vandalism and copper theft. It was easy money for what should have been a simple job. Walk the perimeter every 2 hours, check the anchor store entrances, make sure no one was breaking in to strip the place for scrap metal. The problem was that the mall didn't want to stay empty. Jake first noticed it during his 2nd week on the job. He was doing his 2 a.m. rounds through the main concourse when he heard the distinctive sound of the old fountain in the center court. Not running water, the fountain had been drained and the pumps shut off months ago. But the musical chimes that used to play when the water feature was operational. A soft, tinkling melody that had once provided ambient sound for shoppers now echoed through the empty corridors like a ghost of better times. Jake investigated with his flashlight. But the fountain was exactly as he'd left it. Dry, silent, covered with a tarp to prevent debris from accumulating in the basin. No water, no pumps running, no source for the music he'd clearly heard just moments before. But as he stood there in the empty court, surrounded by the dark storefronts and their security gates pulled down like closed eyelids, Jake could swear he heard something else. Voices, distant and indistinct, like the murmur of conversation from a crowded food court. The kind of background noise that used to fill this space when it was alive with shoppers and families and teenagers hanging out after school. Jake pulled out his radio to call it in. But what would he say? That he was hearing phantom conversations in an abandoned mall? That the broken fountain was playing music that couldn't physically be produced? His supervisor would think he was losing his mind, or worse, that he was drinking on the job. So Jake kept quiet and finished his rounds, telling himself it was just his imagination filling in the silence with memories of what the place used to sound like. But the next night, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just the fountain and voices. As Jake walked through the main corridor, the overhead lights began turning on in sequence ahead of him, illuminating storefronts one by one as if the mall was waking up to welcome a visitor. Behind him, the lights turned off in the same orderly fashion, leaving him walking through a small pool of illumination that moved with him like a spotlight. Jake stopped walking, and the lights stopped turning on. He took 3 steps backward, and 3 lights behind him flickered back to life. It was as if the building was responding to his presence, coming alive to accommodate his patrol route. This time, Jake did call his supervisor. "Electrical systems can malfunction," Frank explained over the radio. "Especially in buildings that have been shut down. You get power surges, automatic timers that don't reset properly, motion sensors that go haywire. Nothing to worry about." "What about the fountain music?" There was a pause. "The what?" "The fountain in the center court. It's been playing music the last 2 nights, but the system's been shut down for months." "Jake, are you feeling okay? Maybe you should take a break. Get some coffee from the vending machine in the security office." But Jake knew what he'd heard, what he'd seen. And as his shift continued, the mall's phantom activity only got more pronounced. The escalators started running. Not all at once, but in a pattern that seemed almost playful. Jake would be walking past the north entrance when he'd hear the familiar mechanical hum of the escalator motors starting up. When he investigated, he'd find the up escalator running normally, its metal steps moving in an endless loop like it was carrying invisible passengers to the second floor. But when Jake rode it to the top, the down escalator would start running, and the up escalator would stop. It was like the mall was inviting him to play a game of follow the leader, using its abandoned infrastructure as game pieces. The security cameras in the office showed nothing unusual. According to the video feeds, Jake was walking through a dark, empty building with no lights, no running escalators, no fountain music. But Jake's direct experience told a different story. He was seeing and hearing things that the cameras couldn't detect or wouldn't record. On his 4th night, Jake decided to test the boundaries of whatever was happening. Instead of following his usual patrol route, he went directly to the old Spencer's gift shop and sat down on the bench outside. Within minutes, the store's neon signs flickered to life, casting purple and green light into the corridor. The music system activated, playing the kind of alternative rock that Spencer's had always used to attract teenage customers. Jake moved to the GameStop, and its displays lit up, showing preview videos for games that were probably 2 years old now. The electronics boutique across the way responded by turning on its sound system, creating a cacophony of competing advertisements and demo tracks. It was like the stores were competing for his attention, each one trying to lure him inside with the same marketing techniques they'd used when they were operational. But the most unsettling part was the food court. When Jake entered the dining area, every restaurant came to life simultaneously. The pizza place's ovens began glowing as if they were preheating. The Chinese restaurant's neon signs started flashing. The coffee shop's espresso machine began hissing and steaming. Even the soft-serve ice cream machine at the frozen yogurt stand started running, though there was no product to dispense. And then Jake heard the conversations. Not phantom voices this time, but clear, distinct conversations coming from the seating area. Families discussing their shopping plans, teenagers gossiping about school drama, business people taking lunch meetings. The sounds were so realistic that Jake could make out individual words, specific details about people's lives. But when he looked at the tables, they were empty. Jake sat down at one of the tables and listened. At the table next to him, a mother was explaining to her young son why he couldn't have candy before dinner. Behind him, two women were discussing their friend's upcoming wedding. Across the court, an elderly couple was debating whether to see a movie or continue shopping. The conversations were mundane, the kind of everyday interactions that had filled this space thousands of times over the years. But they were also impossible, because the people having them didn't exist. "Hello," Jake called out to the empty food court. "Is someone there?" The conversation stopped immediately, as if everyone had suddenly decided to listen to what the security guard had to say. The silence was complete and somehow more unnerving than the phantom voices had been. Then, slowly, the conversations resumed. But this time, they were all about Jake. "Look, there's the security guard," a woman's voice said. "He looks lonely." "Poor guy," responded a man. "Walking around here all night by himself." "Someone should talk to him," suggested another voice. "Make him feel welcome." Jake stood up so quickly that his chair fell over backward. The sound echoed through the food court, but the invisible conversations continued. "He seems nice," said what sounded like a teenage girl. "Maybe he'd like to stay and have dinner with us." "We have plenty of room," added an elderly woman. "There's always room for one more." "Stay with us, Jake." The voices began to overlap, multiple conversations merging into a chorus. "Stay and keep us company. We get so lonely here when the mall is closed." Jake ran. He sprinted through the main corridor, past the phantom lights and the running escalators, past the storefronts that were trying to entice him with their glowing displays. Behind him, he could hear the food court voices calling his name, inviting him to come back, promising that he'd never have to be alone again. Jake burst through the security office door and grabbed his radio. "Frank, I need someone to come out here right now," he said, his voice shaking. "Jake, it's 3 a.m. What's going on?" "The mall. There's something wrong with this place. It's not empty, Frank. There are people here, but they're not really here. They're talking to me. They know my name." "Jake, you're scaring me. Are you using drugs? Have you been drinking?" "I'm stone cold sober," Jake insisted. "And I'm telling you, this place is haunted or cursed or something. The stores are turning on by themselves, the escalators are running, and there are voices everywhere. I'm sending someone out," Frank said. "Stay in the security office until they get there." But Jake couldn't stay in the security office because the voices had followed him there. They were coming through the mall's PA system now, dozens of different conversations overlapping and blending together. Shoppers discussing their purchases, employees talking about their shifts, maintenance workers coordinating repairs. The accumulated voice of 20 years of human activity in the Westfield shopping center, somehow trapped in the building and replaying endlessly. "Jake," one voice rose above the others, clearer and more distinct. "Why are you afraid of us? We're your friends. We're the people who made this place special." Jake looked at the security monitors and saw something that made his blood freeze. The cameras were now showing the mall as it used to be. Fully operational, brightly lit, filled with shoppers and families. The stores were open, the fountain was running, the food court was packed with people eating and laughing. But Jake knew that if he walked out of the security office, he would find the same dark, empty corridors he'd been patrolling all week. "You can see us now," the voice continued. "The cameras can see us. We're still here, Jake. We never left. When they closed the mall, they closed our world. But they couldn't make us disappear." On the monitors, Jake watched shoppers walking past the security office. Some of them turned to look directly into the camera, as if they could see him watching. They smiled and waved, their faces friendly but somehow wrong, like photographs that had been slightly overexposed. "Join us, Jake," the voice pleaded. "Stay with us forever. You'll never have to leave, never have to worry about the outside world again. The mall will take care of you, just like it took care of all of us." Jake covered his eyes, but he could still hear the voices, still see the impossible images on the security monitors, even through his closed eyelids. The mall was inside his head now, its phantom shoppers and employees becoming part of his thoughts. That's when Frank arrived with 2 other security guards and found Jake in the office, having an animated conversation with empty air. He was laughing and nodding, responding to questions that no one else could hear, completely convinced that he was surrounded by friends. The paramedics diagnosed Jake with a psychotic break, probably brought on by isolation and stress. They sedated him and took him to the hospital, where he spent 3 weeks in psychiatric care. The doctors said he'd experienced a complete break from reality, creating elaborate hallucinations to cope with the loneliness of working alone in an abandoned building. But when they finally released him, Jake could still hear the voices. Not as clearly as that night in the mall, but they were there in quiet moments, whispering at the edge of his consciousness, inviting him to come back, promising him friendship and community in the empty corridors of the Westfield shopping center. Jake never returned to security work. He got a day job at a busy grocery store where there were always people around, always noise and activity to drown out the phantom voices from the mall. But sometimes, late at night when he couldn't sleep, Jake would drive past the Westfield shopping center and see lights in the windows. Not security lights or emergency lighting, but the warm glow of active storefronts. And if he listened carefully, even with his car windows up and the radio playing, he could hear the sound of laughter and conversation coming from inside the building. The new security company hired to patrol the mall went through 6 different guards in 3 months. They all reported the same experiences: phantom voices, lights turning on and off, escalators running by themselves. Most quit after a few nights. The ones who stayed longer had to be removed by paramedics, found in the security office having conversations with people who weren't there. The property management company finally gave up on overnight security. They sealed the entrances and installed an automated monitoring system. But the cameras still sometimes showed glimpses of the mall's impossible past. Shoppers browsing in stores that had been closed for years, families eating in a food court that had been stripped of all its equipment. And on quiet nights, people driving past the abandoned Westfield shopping center swear they can still hear the fountain playing its musical chimes, still see the soft glow of neon signs advertising sales that ended 20 months ago. The mall never forgot what it used to be, and it's still waiting for someone to help it remember. Someone willing to stay forever and become part of its eternal community of phantom shoppers, trapped between the memory of what was and the reality of what can never be again. Some buildings die when they're abandoned, but others just learn to live in the past, replaying their glory days over and over until someone finally agrees to join the show. And there's always room for one more in the food court of the Westfield shopping center, where it's always opening day and the sales never end. Let's move to our 7th story. Patricia Williams had been working as a night shift caregiver at Sunset Manor for 6 years, and she thought she'd seen everything the job could throw at her. Elderly residents with dementia who wandered the halls at 3 a.m. looking for their long-dead mothers. Patients who screamed in their sleep, reliving traumas from wars fought decades ago. The inevitable deaths that came with working in a facility where most residents were in their 80s and 90s. But she'd never had a patient try to protect her before. Room 237 housed Margaret Henley, an 84-year-old woman with advanced Alzheimer's who had been at Sunset Manor for 3 years. Margaret rarely spoke coherently anymore, and when she did, It was usually to ask for her husband Robert, who had died in 1987. Most of the time, she stared out her window with the vacant expression that had become as familiar to Patricia as her own reflection, which was why it was so strange when Margaret grabbed Patricia's wrist with surprising strength during the Tuesday night medication rounds. "He's in the walls," Margaret whispered, her eyes suddenly sharp and focused in a way Patricia hadn't seen in months. "The maintenance man. He's been watching you through the walls." Patricia gently extracted her wrist from Margaret's grip, used to the random paranoid statements that came with dementia. "It's okay, Mrs. Henley. You're safe here. Let's get you your pills." But Margaret shook her head vigorously, more animated than she'd been in weeks. "No, you don't understand. Patricia, he knows your name. He knows when you work. He's been crawling through the maintenance spaces, watching all the pretty nurses. The other girls, they didn't listen. They thought I was just a crazy old lady." "What other girls?" Patricia asked, more to humor Margaret than because she believed there was any truth to the rambling. "Jennifer. She worked the night shift before you. Sweet girl, always brought me extra pudding." Margaret's voice dropped to a whisper. "She disappeared. They said she got a new job, but I saw him drag her into the walls, through the access panel in the laundry room." Patricia had heard about Jennifer Martinez, her predecessor on the night shift. According to the administration, Jennifer had quit without notice about 7 months ago, right before Patricia was hired. It wasn't unusual for night shift caregivers to burn out quickly. The isolation and stress got to a lot of people. "Mrs. Henley, there's no one in the walls," Patricia said gently. "The maintenance staff works during the day. The building is secure at night." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but they remained focused and lucid. "He has keys, Patricia. He has keys to everything. He comes and goes through the utility rooms, through the spaces between the walls. I see him sometimes when I can't sleep. Tall man, dirty clothes, always carrying that toolbox." Despite herself, Patricia felt a chill run down her spine. Margaret's description was unusually detailed for someone whose mind usually existed in a fog of confusion and lost memories. "When did you see this man last?" Patricia asked. "Tonight," Margaret replied immediately. "About an hour ago. He was in the ceiling above your station, looking down through the maintenance hatch. He had binoculars, Patricia. He was watching you fill out charts." Patricia's blood went cold. She did fill out her reports at the nurse's station around midnight, every night, always sitting in the same chair under the fluorescent lights. If someone was watching from the ceiling access panel, they would have a perfect view of her workspace. "Show me," Patricia said, helping Margaret out of bed. They walked slowly down the corridor to the central nurse's station, Margaret leaning heavily on Patricia's arm, but moving with more purpose than she'd shown in months. When they reached the station, Margaret pointed up at the ceiling tile directly above Patricia's usual chair. "There," she said. "That tile doesn't sit right. It's been moved." Patricia looked up and felt her stomach drop. The ceiling tile was indeed slightly askew, sitting about a quarter-inch lower on one side than the others around it. It was the kind of detail you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. The kind of subtle displacement that could be caused by someone lifting it from above. "Mrs. Henley, I need you to go back to your room and lock the door," Patricia said, her training taking over. "Can you do that for me?" Margaret nodded, suddenly looking frail and confused again, as if the effort of maintaining clarity had exhausted her. "Be careful, Patricia. He's been planning something. I can hear him in the walls sometimes, talking to himself about what he's going to do to the pretty nurses." Patricia escorted Margaret back to her room, made sure the door was locked, then returned to the nurse's station. She pulled a chair over and climbed up to examine the ceiling tile more closely. When she lifted it, her worst fears were confirmed. The space above the ceiling was accessible through a network of maintenance catwalks designed to allow repair workers to service the building's electrical and plumbing systems. But someone had been using it for other purposes. Patricia could see fresh scuff marks on the metal framework, areas where the dust had been disturbed by recent activity. And there, right above her usual chair, was a small hole drilled through the ceiling tile. Barely visible from below, but perfectly positioned for someone to watch the nurse's station without being detected. Patricia's hands were shaking as she replaced the tile and climbed down from the chair. She immediately called her supervisor, but got voicemail. She tried the security company that provided overnight guards for the facility, but was told that Sunset Manor only had patrols on weekends. Weeknights were covered by the staff on duty, which meant Patricia was alone in the building with 12 elderly residents and someone who had been living in the walls like a predator. Patricia's first instinct was to call the police, but what evidence did she have? A disturbed ceiling tile and the word of an Alzheimer's patient weren't enough to convince anyone that there was an immediate threat. She'd sound like she was having a breakdown, seeing dangers that didn't exist. But as Patricia tried to continue her normal rounds, she began noticing things she'd never paid attention to before. Maintenance panels that looked recently opened, ceiling tiles that weren't quite aligned properly, the laundry room door that always seemed to be unlocked even though she was sure she'd secured it earlier. And the sounds. Sunset Manor was never completely quiet at night. Elderly residents snored, called out in their sleep, or got up to use the bathroom. But tonight, Patricia was hearing new sounds. Soft footsteps that didn't match the shuffle of elderly patients. The creak of metal framework that could be someone moving through the ceiling spaces. Doors opening and closing in areas of the building that should be empty. At 2:30 a.m., Patricia was checking on Mr. Rodriguez in room 241 when she heard Margaret calling from across the hall. "Patricia! Patricia, he's here!" Patricia rushed to Margaret's room and found the elderly woman pressed against her window, pointing at something outside. "In the garden," Margaret said. "By the maintenance shed. He's coming back from wherever he goes during the day." Patricia looked out the window and saw a figure moving through the facility's small garden area. Tall, wearing work clothes, carrying what appeared to be a toolbox. The man moved with the casual confidence of someone who belonged there. But it was almost 3 a.m., and no maintenance work was scheduled for the night shift. "Mrs. Henley, I need you to stay in your room and don't open the door for anyone but me," Patricia said. "I'm going to call the police." But before Patricia could reach for her phone, the power went out. Emergency lighting kicked in immediately, bathing the corridor in a dim red glow, but the main electrical system was down. And with it, the electronic locks on the doors, the security cameras, and the phone system. Patricia's cell phone showed no signal. Not unusual in the old brick building, but terrifying under the circumstances. Patricia grabbed a flashlight from the supply closet and began moving through the facility, checking on residents and trying to find a working phone. Most of the patients were still asleep, unaware that anything was wrong. But as Patricia moved through the darkened hallways, she could hear sounds that chilled her to the bone. Footsteps. Not the slow shuffle of elderly residents, but the deliberate pace of someone moving through the building with purpose. And they were coming from inside the walls. Patricia could hear the intruder moving through the maintenance spaces, following the same route she was taking, through the facility. When she went to the East Wing, the sounds moved to the East Wing. When she doubled back toward the central corridor, the footsteps in the ceiling moved in the same direction. He was tracking her movements, staying parallel to her route, always just out of sight above the ceiling tiles. Patricia reached the administration office and found that the landline there was also dead. But the office had a window that faced the street, and she could see a police car parked at the 24-hour gas station 2 blocks away. If she could get outside, she could run for help. But to reach the exit, she would have to pass directly under the area where she'd been hearing the footsteps. Patricia took a deep breath and moved as quietly as possible toward the main entrance. The emergency lighting cast long shadows that seemed to move independently, and every small sound made her heart race. She was halfway to the door when she heard the ceiling tile directly above her being moved aside. A man dropped down from the ceiling space, landing in the corridor between Patricia and the exit. He was exactly as Margaret had described. Tall, wearing dirty maintenance coveralls, holding a toolbox that Patricia now realized wasn't filled with repair equipment. "Hello, Patricia," he said, his voice calm and conversational. "I've been wanting to meet you properly. I'm Carl, the night maintenance supervisor." "There is no night maintenance supervisor," Patricia replied, backing away from him. "I know all the staff here." Carl smiled, and Patricia could see that his teeth were yellowed and crooked. "Of course there is. Who do you think keeps this place running after dark? Who fixes the problems that can't wait until morning?" He opened his toolbox, and Patricia saw restraints, duct tape, and tools that were definitely not for building maintenance. "I've been watching you, Patricia. You're so dedicated, so caring with the residents. Especially old Margaret. She's been trying to warn people about me for years, but no one listens to a woman with dementia." Carl's voice carried a hint of admiration. "You listened, though. That shows you're special." Patricia looked around desperately for another exit, but Carl had positioned himself to block the main corridor. The only other way out was through the activity room, but that would mean turning her back on him. "What happened to Jennifer?" Patricia asked, stalling for time. "Jennifer was a fighter," Carl replied fondly. "She made it all the way to the parking lot before I caught up with her. But she learned to appreciate my company eventually. They all do, once they understand that I'm not going to hurt them. I just want them to stay with me." "Where is she now?" Carl gestured toward the maintenance shed, visible through the window. "She's helping me with my work, along with the others who tried to leave. It gets lonely working nights by yourself, Patricia. You understand that better than anyone." Patricia realized that Carl had been living in the building's maintenance spaces for months, maybe years, using his knowledge of the facility's infrastructure to move unseen, watching the staff, selecting victims. And the administration probably didn't even know he existed. "The police will come looking for me," Patricia said. "Will they?" Carl asked. "You're scheduled to work until 7 a.m. Your replacement won't arrive until then. And I've learned to be very patient, Patricia. Very thorough in my planning." That's when Patricia heard Margaret's voice echoing through the darkened facility. "Patricia, the fire alarm! Pull the fire alarm!" Of course. The fire alarm system would be on a separate electrical circuit from the main power, connected to the emergency generator. And fire department response would be automatic. They wouldn't wait for a phone call. Patricia ran toward the nearest fire alarm panel, but Carl was faster. He tackled her before she could reach it, both of them crashing to the floor. Patricia fought back, using her fingernails to scratch at his face. But he was stronger and had the advantage of surprise. "That's enough," Carl said, pinning her arms to the floor. "I was hoping we could do this the easy way." but you're going to be difficult like Jennifer was. Patricia could hear residents beginning to wake up, confused by the commotion in the corridor. Some of them were calling for help, but their voices were weak and wouldn't carry beyond the building. Carl reached for his toolbox, but before he could grab the restraints, every fire alarm in the building began blaring simultaneously. Margaret Henley stood at the end of the corridor, her hand still on the fire alarm panel, her expression more lucid than Patricia had ever seen it. "I told you he was in the walls," Margaret shouted over the alarm. "I told everyone, but nobody listened to the crazy old lady with dementia." Carl released Patricia and started toward Margaret, but the elderly woman was already moving. Despite her age and condition, she moved through the facility with the confidence of someone who had lived there for 3 years, someone who knew every room and corridor. "You can't hide from me, old woman," Carl called after her. "I know this building better than anyone." But Margaret had advantages Carl didn't consider. She knew which residents were light sleepers, which ones still had enough presence of mind to help. As she moved through the facility, she began knocking on doors, calling out warnings, waking up the entire building. "Everyone, wake up! There's a bad man in the building. Help Patricia. Help the nurse." Soon, elderly residents were emerging from their rooms, confused but alarmed by Margaret's urgency. They might have been frail and disoriented, but they were still a dozen potential witnesses, and Carl's plan depended on secrecy and isolation. The fire department arrived within 5 minutes, followed by police and paramedics. They found Carl trying to escape through the maintenance shed, where they also found evidence of Jennifer Martinez and 2 other missing caregivers from other facilities in the city. Margaret was hailed as a hero, though she couldn't remember most of what had happened by the next morning. Her moments of clarity came and went unpredictably, but she had managed to maintain focus long enough to save Patricia's life. Patricia learned that Carl had been a legitimate maintenance worker years earlier, fired for inappropriate behavior around female staff. But he'd kept copies of the facility keys and had been using his knowledge of the building's infrastructure to continue his predatory activities. The police estimated he'd been living in the spaces between the walls for over 2 years. Patricia transferred to day shift after the incident, but she made sure to visit Margaret regularly. Sometimes the elderly woman would recognize her and remember fragments of that terrible night. Other times, Margaret would stare blankly and ask for her husband, Robert. But occasionally, during their visits, Margaret would grab Patricia's hand with surprising strength and whisper, "I'm glad you listened to me. Nobody ever listens to the old ladies. But sometimes we see things the young people miss." Patricia always assured Margaret that she would keep listening, that the perspectives of elderly residents mattered even when their minds were clouded by disease. Because sometimes the people society dismisses as confused or unreliable are the only ones paying attention to the shadows where predators hide. And sometimes, when everyone else has given up on them, they find the strength to fight back against the monsters that everyone else has failed to see. Margaret Henley died peacefully in her sleep 6 months later, but her room remains empty out of respect for her memory. The staff at Sunset Manor still tell new employees about the night the woman with Alzheimer's saved everyone from the man who lived in the walls. Because heroes come in all forms, and sometimes the most important warnings come from the voices we're least likely to trust. Let's move to our 8th story. Rebecca Chen had been working the night audit shift at the Riverside Inn for 2 years, and she prided herself on being able to handle any situation that walked through the lobby doors at 3 a.m. Drunk businessmen who'd lost their room keys, college kids trying to sneak extra people into single-occupancy rooms, the occasional domestic dispute that spilled over from the parking lot into the hotel corridors. but she'd never had a guest systematically test every lock in the building. It started during her Thursday night shift when she noticed a man in room 127 leaving his room multiple times throughout the night. Not unusual by itself. Some guests had insomnia, others were dealing with jet lag or work calls in different time zones. What bothered Rebecca was the pattern of his movements. Every time the man left room 127, he would walk to a different door and try the handle. Not obviously, not like someone attempting a break-in, but casually, as if he were simply checking to see if he'd found his own room. He'd approach a door, glance around to make sure no one was watching, then try the handle with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Rebecca watched him through the security monitors as he worked his way through the first floor. Door 101, locked. Door 103, locked. Door 105. He paused there longer, jiggling the handle as if the lock might be loose. When that didn't work, he moved on to 107. The man was methodical, patient, and thorough. He never tried more than 3 or 4 doors in a single trip, never stayed out of his room long enough to attract attention. But over the course of the night, he tested nearly every door on the first floor. Rebecca checked the registration. Room 127 was occupied by Michael Torres, checked in that afternoon for a 3-night stay. Business traveler from Denver, paid with a corporate credit card, no special requests or unusual behavior during check-in. Everything appeared completely normal. But normal business travelers didn't spend their nights testing hotel room locks. Rebecca called her supervisor, but got voicemail. The Riverside Inn was a budget hotel that cut costs wherever possible, which meant minimal overnight support for the night audit staff. Rebecca was essentially alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., responsible for handling whatever situations arose without backup. She decided to confront the guest directly. Rebecca knocked on the door of room 127 around 2:30 a.m., during one of the periods when Michael Torres was supposed to be inside. "Mr. Torres, this is Rebecca from the front desk. I wanted to check if everything is okay with your room." The door opened immediately, as if he'd been standing right behind it. Michael Torres was exactly what Rebecca had expected from watching him on the monitors. Middle-aged, average height, wearing the kind of generic business casual clothes that made him blend into any environment. But his eyes were alert and calculating, like he was constantly assessing threats and opportunities. "Everything's fine," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Why do you ask?" "I noticed you've been walking the halls quite a bit tonight. Just wanted to make sure there wasn't a problem with your accommodations." "Insomnia," Michael replied smoothly. "New city, unfamiliar sounds. Sometimes I take walks to help me relax." "Of course," Rebecca said, though something about his explanation felt rehearsed. "If you need anything to help you sleep, extra pillows, white noise machine, just let me know." "Actually, now that you mention it, I am having trouble with my key card," Michael said, producing the plastic card from his pocket. "Sometimes it doesn't work on the first try. I've been having to jiggle the handle a bit to get it to engage properly." Rebecca felt a chill run down her spine. He was providing an excuse for testing door handles, setting up a plausible explanation for behavior that might be reported by other guests. "I can make you a new key card right now," she offered. "That would be great," Michael said, following her toward the front desk. "You know, this is a nice hotel. Very quiet, very private. I like that the rooms are well spaced out, not like those big chain places where you can hear everything through the walls." As Rebecca programmed a new key card, Michael continued his seemingly casual conversation. "How long have you worked here?" Do you enjoy the night shift? About 2 years, Rebecca replied, trying to keep her voice steady. It's usually pretty quiet. I bet it gets lonely, though, especially a young woman like yourself, working alone all night. Michael leaned against the counter, positioning himself between Rebecca and the phone. What do you do if there's an emergency? If someone breaks in or causes trouble? We have security protocols, Rebecca said, which was mostly true. The protocols mainly consisted of calling the police and hoping they arrived quickly. That's smart, Michael said, accepting the new key card. You can never be too careful these days. There are dangerous people out there. People who might see a small hotel like this as an easy target. The way he said easy target made Rebecca's skin crawl. This wasn't a casual conversation between a guest and hotel staff. This was a predator assessing vulnerabilities, gathering information about security measures and response times. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight? Rebecca asked, trying to signal an end to the conversation. Actually, yes, Michael said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. I'm expecting some colleagues to join me tomorrow night. They'll be arriving late, probably after midnight. I wanted to make sure that wouldn't be a problem. Not at all. Do they have reservations? They prefer to pay cash, if that's okay. Expenses can be complicated with corporate travel. Michael smiled again, and Rebecca noticed that he had very white, very straight teeth. Perfect teeth. The kind that came from expensive dental work. We accept cash, Rebecca said, though every instinct was telling her not to accommodate whatever Michael was planning. Excellent. They'll probably want rooms on the same floor as mine, if possible. Maybe 125 and 129. We're working on a project that requires a lot of coordination. Rebecca looked at the registration system. Rooms 125 and 129 were currently unoccupied, and no reservations were scheduled. Which meant Michael had specifically chosen room 127 to position himself between two empty rooms. I can certainly check availability when they arrive, she said. Perfect, Michael said, heading back toward the elevator. Oh, and Rebecca? I noticed the side door by the vending machines doesn't seem to latch properly. You might want to have maintenance look at that. Rebecca's blood went cold. The side door was an emergency exit that wasn't supposed to be accessible from outside. If it wasn't latching properly, someone could enter the building without going through the front desk. After Michael disappeared into the elevator, Rebecca immediately went to check the side door. It appeared to be secure, but when she examined the latch mechanism more closely, she found scratches around the lock that suggested someone had been tampering with it. Rebecca spent the rest of her shift documenting everything she'd observed. Michael's systematic door testing, his probing questions about security, his request for specific room numbers, and his mention of the side door. She also reviewed the security footage more carefully and noticed something she'd missed before. Michael's random testing of door handles wasn't random at all. He was specifically targeting rooms that were registered to single female guests. Room 101, Sarah Martinez, traveling nurse. Room 103, Linda Wong, pharmaceutical sales representative. Room 105, Jessica Parker, graduate student attending a conference. Room 107, Amanda Foster, real estate agent. Every door Michael had tested belonged to a woman traveling alone for business or academic purposes. Women who might not be missed immediately if they disappeared. Women whose absence might be attributed to changes in travel plans rather than foul play. Rebecca called the police, but her report was met with skepticism. Michael hadn't actually broken into any rooms, hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't committed any crimes that the officers could identify. Testing door handles could be explained as confusion about room numbers. Asking about hotel security could be legitimate concern for personal safety. "We'll increase patrols in the area," the responding officer assured her. "But unless this guy actually does something illegal, there's not much we can do." Rebecca knew that by the time Michael did something illegal, it would be too late for whoever became his victim. The next night, Michael's colleagues arrived. 2 men, both paying cash, both requesting rooms 125 and 129. They looked like Michael, generic business casual clothing, perfectly forgettable faces, the kind of men who could disappear into any crowd. But they moved with the same predatory awareness, the same calculating assessment of their surroundings. Rebecca assigned them to different rooms on the 3rd floor, claiming that 125 and 129 were already occupied. The 3 men weren't happy about the change, but they couldn't argue without revealing their real intentions. But Rebecca knew she'd only bought time, not solved the problem. Around 1 a.m., Rebecca noticed unusual activity on the security monitors. The 3 men were moving through the hotel separately, using the stairwells to avoid the elevators. They were conducting a coordinated reconnaissance of the building, mapping exit routes and identifying target rooms. Rebecca called 911, but the dispatcher said that without evidence of an actual crime in progress, police response would be limited. Walking through hotel corridors wasn't illegal, even if it seemed suspicious. That's when Rebecca decided to take matters into her own hands. She began calling the rooms occupied by solo female guests, waking them up with a fabricated story about a water leak that required them to relocate to different rooms. Within an hour, she had moved Sarah Martinez, Linda Wong, Jessica Parker, and Amanda Foster to rooms on the 4th floor, far from where the 3 men were conducting their surveillance. She also activated the hotel's emergency protocols, calling the owner and the security company that provided backup support. It would take them 20 minutes to respond, but at least help was coming. At 2:15 a.m., the side door alarm went off. Rebecca watched the security monitor as Michael Torres entered through the emergency exit, confirming that he had indeed tampered with the locking mechanism. He moved through the 1st floor corridor like he owned the place, heading directly for room 105. Jessica Parker's original room, now empty. The other 2 men appeared on the 2nd floor cameras, each heading toward rooms that had been occupied by solo female guests just hours earlier. Rebecca hit the panic button that connected directly to the police emergency dispatch, then grabbed the baseball bat that the previous night auditor had kept behind the front desk. Michael appeared in the lobby 3 minutes later, his friendly demeanor completely gone. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where are who?" Rebecca replied, though they both knew she understood exactly what he was asking. "The women. The guests in rooms 101, 103, 105, and 107. They're not in their rooms?" "Guests check out all the time," Rebecca said, backing toward the office door. "People change their travel plans." Michael smiled, but there was nothing friendly about it anymore. "No, Rebecca. You moved them. You figured out what we were planning, and you interfered." The other 2 men appeared in the lobby, flanking the front desk to cut off Rebecca's escape routes. "This is really unfortunate," Michael continued. "We had everything planned so carefully. 3 quick jobs, in and out, no complications. But you just had to be the hero." "The police are coming," Rebecca said, though she had no idea how long they would take to respond to the panic button. "Are they?" asked one of the other men. "Because we've been monitoring the police scanner all night," Lots of calls about domestic disputes and traffic accidents. Very busy night for law enforcement. Rebecca realized that the three men had been planning this for weeks, possibly months. They'd studied the hotel's layout, the security protocols, the police response times. They'd probably done this before, in other cities, other hotels. But they hadn't planned for a night auditor who paid attention and took action. "You know what?" Michael said, pulling a zip-tie restraint from his pocket. "Maybe this works out better. Hotel desk clerk disappears during the night shift. No witnesses, no evidence. Much cleaner than our original plan." That's when Rebecca heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens. Multiple units getting closer fast. The panic button had worked, and the emergency response was immediate and overwhelming. Michael and his partners heard the sirens too. They looked at each other, communicating silently, then moved toward the different exits. But Rebecca had already locked down the building using the emergency protocols, and the police were surrounding the hotel. All three men were arrested in the parking lot, trying to escape through windows. In their rooms, police found restraints, sedatives, and detailed plans for kidnapping the solo female guests. They also found evidence linking them to similar attacks at budget hotels in 5 other states. Rebecca's quick thinking and willingness to take action had prevented multiple kidnappings and possibly murders. The FBI later confirmed that Michael Torres was part of an organized crime ring that targeted business travelers at small hotels with minimal security. Rebecca received commendations from the police, the FBI, and the Hotel Industry Association. But the recognition that meant the most came from Sarah Martinez, Linda Wong, Jessica Parker, and Amanda Foster. The 4 women whose lives she had saved by trusting her instincts and refusing to ignore suspicious behavior. Rebecca eventually left the hotel industry and became a security consultant, helping small businesses identify vulnerabilities and develop safety protocols. But she never forgot the lesson she learned that night. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who look completely normal, who blend into everyday situations until the moment they decide to strike. And sometimes the only thing standing between them and their victims is one person who pays attention, asks questions, and refuses to explain away behavior that feels wrong. Because heroes don't always wear uniforms or carry badges. Sometimes they're just night shift workers with good instincts and the courage to act when everyone else says there's nothing to worry about. The Riverside Inn installed better security systems and hired additional overnight staff after the incident. But they kept Rebecca's baseball bat behind the front desk as a reminder that sometimes the best security system is a vigilant employee who knows the difference between a guest and a predator. Let's move to our 9th story. Danny Gutierrez had been working the night shift at Mega Distribute Warehouse for 18 months, and he thought he knew every sound the massive building made after dark. The hum of the refrigeration units in the frozen food section, the occasional creak of the metal shelving that stretched 30 feet toward the ceiling, the distant rumble of the overnight delivery trucks pulling up to the loading docks. But lately, the warehouse had been making new sounds, human sounds. It started 3 weeks ago when Danny was restocking inventory in aisle J47, deep in the consumer electronics section. He was alone in the building, except for Rodriguez, the security guard, who spent most of his shift in the office watching movies on his phone. The warehouse was a maze of towering shelves that created narrow corridors stretching for hundreds of yards, filled with everything from televisions to toothbrushes to industrial cleaning supplies. Danny was scanning barcodes and updating inventory counts when he heard it, the distinctive beep of a handheld scanner. Not his scanner, which was silent unless he was actively using it, but the same model, producing the same electronic tone from somewhere deeper in the electronics section. Danny stopped working and listened. The beeping continued for maybe 30 seconds, following the rhythm of someone systematically scanning products. Then it stopped abruptly. "Rodriguez?" Danny called out, his voice echoing through the cavernous space. "You doing inventory counts up there?" No response. Danny pulled out his radio to call the security office, but Rodriguez answered before he could transmit. "What's up, Danny? Everything okay? You're not in the electronics section right now." "Nah, man, I'm in the office doing paperwork. Why?" Danny looked around the towering shelves surrounding him. The warehouse held over 100,000 different products, spread across 50 aisles, each one stretching the length of 2 football fields. Plenty of places for someone to hide, but no reason for anyone else to be in the building at 2 a.m. "Probably nothing," Danny said. "Thought I heard another scanner." "Electronics acting up again," Rodriguez replied. "Those wireless signals bounce around weird in here sometimes. Probably picking up interference from the cell towers." But Danny knew the difference between electronic interference and the deliberate rhythm of someone doing inventory work. And over the next few nights, the phantom scanning continued, always in different sections of the warehouse, always just out of sight behind the towering shelves, and always stopping the moment Danny tried to investigate. On Thursday night, Danny decided to track down the source of the sounds. Instead of calling out or using his radio, he moved quietly through the aisles, following the beeping toward its origin. The sounds led him to aisle M23, home goods and kitchenware. But when he rounded the corner, the aisle was empty, except for the products. Someone had been rearranging the inventory. Not randomly, but systematically, creating patterns and messages using the product placement. In the paper towel section, rolls had been arranged to spell out Danny across 3 shelves. In the cleaning supplies aisle, bottles of bleach and detergent had been organized to create an arrow pointing toward the back of the warehouse. Danny's hands were shaking as he took photos with his phone. This wasn't equipment malfunction or electronic interference. Someone was in the building, someone who knew his name, someone who was playing games with him. But when Danny reviewed the security footage the next morning, the cameras showed nothing. According to the video record, Danny had spent the night working alone, talking to himself, rearranging products for no apparent reason. The footage showed him spelling out his own name with paper towels, creating the arrow with cleaning supplies. But Danny had no memory of doing any of those things. "You've been working too many overnight shifts," Rodriguez suggested when Danny showed him the footage. "Isolation can mess with your head, make you do things you don't remember. Maybe you should talk to management about switching to days." But Danny knew he hadn't rearranged those products. He could feel someone watching him, following his movements through the warehouse, always staying just out of sight behind the maze of shelving units. Friday night, Danny came to work with a plan. Instead of following his usual route through the warehouse, he would double back unexpectedly, use the overhead walkways that maintenance workers use to service the high bay lighting, approach the phantom sounds from different angles. The scanning started around 1:30 a.m. Coming from the automotive section in the northwest corner of the building, Danny quietly made his way to the nearest maintenance ladder and climbed 20 feet up to the metal walkway that ran along the top of the shelving units. From up there, he could see down into the aisles, track movement without being detected. What Danny saw made his blood freeze. A man was moving through aisle R15, scanning products with a handheld device identical to Danny's. But he wasn't taking inventory. He was creating a message. Using automotive air fresheners, the man was spelling out words across multiple shelves. "Lonely up there?" The man knew Danny was watching from above. Danny tried to climb down quickly, but quietly. But the metal walkway creaked under his weight. By the time he reached the floor, the automotive section was empty. But the message remained, clearly visible in the harsh fluorescent lighting. This time, Danny called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes and conducted a thorough search of the warehouse. They checked every aisle, every hiding spot, every maintenance area and storage room. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone else had been in the building. But they did find something that chilled Danny to the bone. In the employee break room, someone had used refrigerator magnets to spell out a message on the metal locker. "Games are fun, Danny, but I'm getting bored." The break room had security cameras, but when they reviewed the footage, it showed Danny alone, apparently arranging the magnets himself while talking to empty air. According to the video record, Danny was having animated conversations with someone who wasn't there, laughing at jokes no one else had told, responding to questions no one else had asked. "Sir, have you been under any unusual stress lately?" one of the officers asked gently. Working alone for extended periods can sometimes cause hallucinations, especially auditory and visual disturbances. Danny insisted that he wasn't hallucinating, that someone was definitely in the warehouse with him. But faced with video evidence that seemed to show him talking to himself and rearranging products, even Danny began to doubt his own sanity. The officers left, promising to increase patrols around the warehouse. Danny finished his shift in a state of confused terror, questioning everything he thought he knew about the past 3 weeks. But Saturday night, the truth revealed itself in the most terrifying way possible. Danny arrived for his shift to find that someone had used warehouse products to create an elaborate display in the main aisle that ran down the center of the building. Hundreds of items arranged in precise rows, creating a path that led from the front entrance toward the back of the warehouse where the loading docks were located. This wasn't random product rearrangement. This was an invitation, a red carpet made of consumer goods, leading Danny toward something waiting in the darkness. Danny called Rodriguez, but got no answer. The security office was empty, Rodriguez's chair still warm, but no sign of where he'd gone. Danny found Rodriguez's radio on the desk, still tuned to the warehouse frequency. But when Danny tried to call for help, no one responded. Danny was alone in the warehouse with whoever had been playing games with him for 3 weeks. And now, the games were ending. Danny followed the product path toward the back of the warehouse, his flashlight cutting through the shadows between the towering shelves. The path led past electronics, past automotive, past home goods, all the way to the loading dock area where delivery trucks backed up to unload cargo. There, in the space between 2 parked trailers, Danny found Rodriguez. The security guard was sitting in a chair, very much alive but restrained with plastic zip ties. His eyes were wide with terror, and there was duct tape over his mouth. When he saw Danny, Rodriguez began struggling frantically, trying to warn him about something behind him. "Hello, Danny." Danny spun around to find a man emerging from the shadows between the trailers. Medium height, wearing warehouse uniforms similar to Danny's, carrying a scanner and what appeared to be a small notebook. "You're probably wondering who I am," the man continued conversationally. "My name is Marcus. I used to work here about 2 years ago. Night shift, just like you." "Used to work here?" "Until they fired me for stealing inventory," Marcus replied. "Except I wasn't stealing it. I was living here, sleeping in the break room after my shifts, eating from the vending machines, using the showers in the employee locker room. This place became my home, Danny. My whole world." Marcus gestured toward the vast warehouse surrounding them. Do you know how easy it is to hide in a place this big? Do you know how many unused spaces there are? How many areas the security cameras don't cover? I've been living here for 18 months, ever since they fired me. Danny looked around, realizing the scope of what Marcus was telling him. The warehouse was over 200,000 square feet, with countless hiding spots among the inventory, maintenance areas, and storage spaces. Someone could live here indefinitely if they were careful. "Why are you telling me this?" Danny asked. "Because I'm lonely, Danny. It gets very quiet here at night, just me and the products. I started watching you work, listening to you talk to yourself, learning your routines. You became my entertainment, my companion, even though you didn't know I existed." Marcus opened his notebook, and Danny could see pages of handwritten observations. Every detail of Danny's work habits, his personal phone calls, his family problems, his fears and hopes, all documented with obsessive precision. But watching wasn't enough anymore. Marcus continued. "I wanted to interact with you, to play games, to see how you'd react to different situations. The scanning sounds, the product arrangements, the messages. That was me trying to communicate." "You made me think I was going crazy," Danny said, anger overriding his fear. "The security cameras." "Oh, that was easy." Marcus smiled. "I know every camera angle in this place, every blind spot. I can move through here without being detected. But you can't. So when the cameras show you rearranging products, it's because I arranged them before you got there, then hid while you discovered them." Danny realized the horrifying sophistication of Marcus's psychological manipulation. He'd been gaslighting Danny for weeks, creating experiences that couldn't be verified, making Danny question his own perception of reality. "What do you want from me?" Danny asked. "I want you to stay," Marcus replied simply. "Live here with me. We can work the night shift together, take care of the warehouse, keep each other company. No more loneliness, no more talking to empty air. I have a family, a job, a life outside this place." Marcus's expression darkened. "So did I, Danny. Until they took it all away. Until they decided I wasn't worth keeping around." He gestured toward Rodriguez, still struggling in his chair. He was going to call, "The police report suspicious activity." I couldn't let that happen. Danny realized that Marcus wasn't just lonely. He was completely detached from reality, living in a fantasy world where the warehouse was his kingdom and Danny was his chosen companion. "The police will come looking for me," Danny said. "Will they? You called them last night and they thought you were having a breakdown. Your supervisor thinks you've been working too many overnight shifts. Even you started to doubt your own sanity." Marcus stepped closer, and Danny could see the madness in his eyes. "By the time anyone realizes you're missing, we'll have figured out how to hide you so well that no one will ever find you." That's when Danny remembered the fire suppression system. The warehouse used a high-pressure water sprinkler system designed to quickly flood the building in case of fire. If Danny could trigger it, the deluge of water would create chaos and hopefully give him a chance to escape. Danny began backing toward the nearest fire alarm pull station, but Marcus anticipated his move. "I know what you're thinking," Marcus said, producing a knife from his pocket. "But the fire alarm won't help you. I disabled the connection to the fire department weeks ago. All it will do is make noise and get us wet." But Marcus was wrong about one thing. The fire suppression system wasn't just connected to the fire department. It was also connected to the warehouse's automated security system, which would immediately notify the police, the property management company, and Mega Distribute's corporate security. Danny lunged for the fire alarm and pulled it before Marcus could stop him. Immediately, the warehouse filled with the deafening sound of alarm bells and the roar of thousands of gallons of water cascading from the ceiling sprinklers. The lights flickered as electrical systems began shutting down to prevent electrocution, and emergency lighting bathed the warehouse in an eerie red glow. Marcus screamed in rage and frustration, but his voice was lost in the chaos of alarms and rushing water. Danny used the confusion to free Rodriguez from his restraints. Then both men ran toward the front exit through ankle-deep water and total darkness. Police, firefighters, and paramedics arrived within minutes, responding to the automatic fire alarm. They found Marcus in the warehouse, soaking wet and babbling about his home being destroyed by the flood. A search of his hiding places revealed a sophisticated living area he'd created among the inventory, complete with stolen furniture, electronics, and months' worth of food. Marcus was charged with kidnapping, stalking, breaking and entering, and criminal mischief. During his psychiatric evaluation, doctors determined he'd been living in a delusional state for over a year, completely disconnected from reality and convinced that the warehouse was his rightful domain. Danny quit his job at Mega Distribute and found work at a smaller company with better security and day shift hours. But the experience taught him that isolation can drive people to extremes, that loneliness can become a form of madness that distorts reality and justifies terrible actions. Rodriguez recovered from his ordeal and now works security for a retail store where he's never alone at night. He still has nightmares about being trapped in that chair, watching Marcus emerge from the shadows like a predator who'd been stalking his prey for months. The warehouse was cleaned up and reopened, but they installed motion sensors throughout the building and hired additional security staff. The new night shift workers are never alone. They work in teams of 3 with constant radio contact and regular check-ins. But sometimes, late at night when the new crew is doing inventory in the deep aisles of the warehouse, they find products arranged in unusual patterns. Messages spelled out with merchandise, arrows pointing toward empty spaces, evidence that someone has been moving through the building without being detected. The management claims it's just employees playing pranks or making mistakes during restocking. But the night shift workers know better. They know that in a building this large, with this many hiding places, it would be easy for someone to live undetected for months or even years. And they know that loneliness can drive people to desperate measures, making them cling to any human connection, even if that connection has to be forced. So they work in groups, they watch each other's backs, and they never ignore the feeling that someone might be watching them from the shadows between the towering shelves. Because in a place designed for storing things, it's all too easy for people to get stored away as well, lost in the maze of inventory until they become just another product on the endless shelves of human desperation. Let's move to our 10th story. Sarah Kim had been working overnight shifts at Valley Animal Hospital for 4 years, and she'd always found comfort in the presence of the animals. Even when they were sick or injured, there was something peaceful about being surrounded by creatures who didn't judge, didn't lie, and didn't harbor hidden agendas. The night shift was usually quiet, monitoring post-surgical patients, administering medications, comforting animals who were scared and away from their families. But tonight, every single animal in the hospital was staring at the same empty corner of the recovery room. It started around 1:15 a.m. when Sarah was checking on a German Shepherd recovering from hip surgery. Max was a gentle giant, the kind of dog who wagged his tail even when he was in pain. But when Sarah entered his kennel to check his vitals, Max was pressed against the back wall, his ears flat against his head, a low whine coming from his throat. Max wasn't looking at Sarah. He was staring intently at the corner of the room near the emergency exit, his body language screaming terror in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. "What is it, boy?" Sarah whispered, following Max's gaze. The corner was empty except for some medical equipment and a stack of clean towels. Nothing that should frighten a dog who'd been through multiple surgeries and treatments. But Max wouldn't stop staring. His whining grew more urgent, and he began to shake despite the pain medication that should have kept him calm and drowsy. Sarah moved to the next kennel, where Luna, a tabby cat recovering from a spay surgery, was exhibiting the same behavior. The cat was pressed against the back of her cage, pupils dilated to black circles, every hair on her body standing on end. She was staring at the exact same corner that had terrified Max. By the time Sarah had checked every animal in the recovery room, the pattern was undeniable. Dogs, cats, a ferret, even a parrot. All of them focused on that empty corner with a kind of primal fear that animals reserve for genuine threats. But no matter how carefully Sarah examined the area, she found nothing that could explain their behavior. Sarah had worked with animals long enough to know that they sensed things humans couldn't. Changes in barometric pressure before storms, the approach of earthquakes, the presence of illness or injury before symptoms became apparent. But she'd never seen every animal in a facility react to the same invisible stimulus. She called Dr. Martinez, the veterinarian, on call, but got voicemail. The overnight tech was supposed to handle routine monitoring and only contact the doctor for emergencies. A bunch of animals staring at an empty corner didn't exactly qualify as a medical crisis. But at 2:30 a.m., the behavior escalated. Sarah was in the pharmacy preparing medications when she heard a sound that made her blood freeze. Every animal in the hospital crying out simultaneously, not barking or meowing, but the kind of distress calls that animals make when they're in mortal danger. Sarah ran back to the recovery room and found chaos. The dogs were howling, the cats were yowling, the parrot was shrieking, and the ferret was making a chittering alarm call she'd never heard before. All of them were as far from that corner as their cages would allow, pressing themselves against the walls in absolute terror. But now Sarah could see what they were reacting to. The temperature in the corner had dropped dramatically. Her breath was visible in the air, and frost was forming on the metal surfaces of nearby equipment. The temperature differential was so extreme that she could see the exact boundary where normal room temperature met the supernatural cold. Sarah grabbed a thermometer from the supply cabinet and approached the corner carefully. The reading dropped steadily as she got closer. 72 degrees at the center of the room, 65 degrees 6 feet away, 58 degrees 3 feet away. At the exact spot where all the animals were staring, the thermometer read 31 degrees. Something was drawing heat from the air in that specific location, creating a zone of intense cold that defied all natural laws. And whatever was causing it was invisible to human eyes, but clearly perceivable to every animal in the hospital. Sarah's hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone to document the phenomenon. She took photos of the frosted equipment, recorded the temperature readings, captured video of the animals' terrified reactions. But when she reviewed the footage, her camera showed nothing unusual, just a normal corner of a veterinary recovery room. The animals, however, continued to act like they were witnessing something horrific. At 3 a.m., the behavior changed again. The animals stopped crying out, but their fear intensified. They huddled in the farthest corners of their cages, some of them trembling so violently that Sarah was worried they would injure themselves. And then Sarah heard it, a sound that shouldn't exist in a veterinary hospital. Scratching, like claws on concrete or fingernails dragging across rough surfaces. The sound was coming from inside the walls, moving along the interior structure of the building. Sarah could track its progress by watching the animals' heads turn in unison, following the sound as it moved from the recovery room toward the surgical suite. Sarah grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound, the animal's terrified cries echoing behind her. The scratching led her through the hallway, past the examination rooms, into the surgical suite where Dr. Martinez performed operations during the day. The surgical suite was sterile, quiet, and cold. But not the supernatural cold she'd experienced in the recovery room. This was the normal chill of air conditioning and tile floors. Sarah swept her flashlight around the room, checking every corner, every piece of equipment. That's when she found the first body. Hidden. Behind the anesthesia machine, partially concealed by surgical drapes, was the corpse of a German shepherd. But not just any German shepherd. This was Rex, a patient who had supposedly died during surgery 3 months ago. Dr. Martinez had told the owners that Rex had suffered complications from anesthesia and had died despite their best efforts to save him. But Rex's body showed signs of trauma that had nothing to do with surgical complications. Deep scratches across his ribs, bite marks on his throat, injuries that suggested he had been attacked by something with claws and teeth. Sarah's flashlight beam trembled as she continued searching the surgical suite. Behind the oxygen tanks, she found the bodies of 4 cats, all former patients who had allegedly died from various medical conditions over the past 6 months. Like Rex, their bodies showed evidence of violent trauma rather than natural death or euthanasia. In the storage closet, Sarah discovered the most horrifying find of all: a collection of collars, tags, and personal items belonging to dozens of animals who had been patients at Valley Animal Hospital. Animals whose owners had been told their pets had died from illness or injury, but whose bodies had never been returned for burial. Sarah's phone showed no signal, and the landline in the surgical suite had been disconnected. She was alone in the building, with evidence of what appeared to be systematic animal abuse and murder, surrounded by the terrified cries of animals who could sense the presence of their deceased companions. The scratching sound returned, louder now, more urgent. It was moving through the walls toward the recovery room, and Sarah realized that whatever had killed those animals was still in the building, still hunting. Sarah ran back toward the recovery room, but stopped short when she saw Dr. Martinez standing in the doorway. "Sarah," he said, his voice calm and professional despite the chaos of animal distress calls around them. "What are you doing here so late? I thought you were scheduled to leave at midnight." "Dr. Martinez," Sarah gasped. "There are bodies in the surgical suite, dead animals, patients who—" "Sarah, you look upset, Doctor." Martinez interrupted, stepping closer. "Have you been taking your medication? You know stress can trigger episodes." Sarah stared at him, confused. She'd never mentioned any medication or mental health issues to Dr. Martinez. She'd never had any mental health issues. "The animals," Sarah said, gesturing toward the recovery room. "They're all terrified. Something's wrong with the building, with that coroner." "The animals are sedated, Sarah. They're quiet and comfortable." Dr. Martinez's smile was gentle, but his eyes were cold. "I think you might be having another breakdown. Remember last time? The hallucinations, the paranoid thoughts about the other staff?" Sarah had never had a breakdown. She'd never experienced hallucinations. But Dr. Martinez was speaking with the confident authority of someone establishing a medical narrative, creating a history of mental instability that could explain away anything Sarah might report. "I found bodies," Sarah insisted. "Rex, the German shepherd from 3 months ago. He's in the surgical suite along with cats and—" "Sarah, Rex was cremated. His ashes were returned to his family." Dr. Martinez pulled out his phone. "I'm going to call someone to come pick you up. You shouldn't be alone right now." But Sarah could still hear the animals crying out in terror, could still see their frightened faces pressed against the backs of their cages. And she could see Dr. Martinez clearly now. The scratches on his hands that he'd tried to conceal with long sleeves, the way he avoided looking directly at the corner where all the animals were staring. The predatory patience in his voice as he tried to gaslight her into silence. "You're the one killing them," Sarah whispered. Dr. Martinez's professional facade cracked slightly. "Sarah, you're having a psychotic episode. You need help." The scratching sounds in the walls, the cold spot where they're all staring. "Those are the animals you murdered, aren't they? They're still here, still trying to warn people." "Animals don't have souls, Sarah. When they die, they're gone. There's nothing supernatural about veterinary medicine." But Dr. Martinez's voice had changed, becoming defensive, almost angry. Sarah looked around the recovery room, seeing it with new eyes. The animals weren't just scared. They were trying to protect her. Every dog, cat, ferret, and bird was positioned between Sarah and Dr. Martinez, creating a barrier of living creatures who could sense the danger she represented. "How many?" Sarah asked. "How many animals have you killed?" Dr. Martinez dropped the pretense entirely. "They were suffering, Sarah. Terminal illnesses, chronic pain, poor quality of life. I was ending their misery. Without the owner's consent? Owners are sentimental. They keep animals alive long past the point of dignity, spending thousands of dollars on treatments that only prolong suffering. I was being merciful." Sarah realized that the full scope of Dr. Martinez's crimes. He'd been systematically euthanizing animals without permission, telling owners their pets had died from natural causes, then keeping the bodies as some kind of twisted trophies. But something had gone wrong with his disposal methods, and the animals' spirits were trapped in the building, trying to communicate their fate to the living. "The owners trusted you," Sarah said. "The owners were fools," Dr. Martinez replied, "spending fortunes on creatures that can't even understand their own mortality. But you understand, don't you, Sarah? You understand that sometimes death is a kindness." Dr. Martinez began moving toward the emergency exit, the same corner where all the animals had been staring. Sarah realized he was planning to dispose of her body the same way he disposed of the animals, probably in the incinerator he used for medical waste. But the animals had other plans. Luna, the tabby cat, somehow managed to open her cage latch and leaped directly at Dr. Martinez's face. Max, despite his post-surgical condition, began barking with such intensity that the sound echoed through the building like an alarm. The parrot began screaming, "Help! Help!" in a voice so human-like, it sounded like a person calling for rescue. In the chaos, Sarah grabbed the emergency phone that connected directly to 911. But before she could dial, every cage in the recovery room opened simultaneously. Sarah had never seen the latches on those cages malfunction before, had never heard of them all opening at once. But suddenly, every animal that was physically capable of moving was loose in the recovery room, creating a furious barrier between Sarah and Dr. Martinez. Dr. Martinez tried to push through the mass of protective animals, but they fought back with the desperation of creatures who knew they were facing their killer. Even the animals who were heavily sedated seemed to find the strength to participate, biting at his ankles, clawing at his clothes, creating enough chaos to prevent him from reaching Sarah. The 911 operator answered just as Dr. Martinez pulled out a syringe filled with euthanasia solution, the same drug he'd been using to kill animals, without their owner's knowledge. "Valley Animal Hospital." Sarah gasped into the phone. "The veterinarian is trying to kill me. He's been murdering animals. There are bodies." Dr. Martinez lunged toward Sarah with a syringe. But Max, despite his recent surgery, threw his considerable weight against the man's legs. Dr. Martinez went down hard, the syringe flying across the room and shattering against the wall. Police arrived within 8 minutes, responding to both Sarah's 911 call and multiple noise complaints from neighbors who had heard the animal distress calls through the hospital's walls. They found Dr. Martinez unconscious on the floor, surrounded by protective animals, while Sarah huddled in the corner, talking rapidly into the emergency phone. The investigation that followed revealed the full extent of Dr. Martinez's crimes. Over 2 years, he had killed 43 animals without authorization, telling owners that their pets had died from medical complications. He'd been keeping some bodies in freezers, burning others in the medical waste incinerator. But several had been hidden throughout the building. The owners of the murdered animals were devastated to learn the truth about their pets' deaths. Many had spent months grieving animals they believed had died from natural causes, never knowing their beloved companions had been murdered by the person they trusted to heal them. Sarah left veterinary work after the incident, but she kept in touch with the animals who had saved her life. Max recovered completely from his surgery and lived 5 more happy years with his family. Luna was adopted by Sarah herself and became a beloved companion who seemed to understand that they had both survived something terrible together. The Valley Animal Hospital was closed permanently, and Dr. Martinez was sentenced to 15 years in prison for animal cruelty, fraud, and attempted murder. But the building remained empty for months afterward, because every potential buyer reported the same phenomenon Sarah had experienced: phantom scratching sounds in the walls, cold spots that defied explanation, and the persistent feeling that unseen eyes were watching them. Local animal rescue groups believe the building is still haunted by the spirits of Dr. Martinez's victims, animals who died in pain and confusion, never understanding why the person they trusted had betrayed them. But rescue workers also report that the presences in the building seem protective rather than malevolent, as if the deceased animals are still trying to watch over the living. Sarah now works at an animal sanctuary, caring for rescued animals who have survived abuse and neglect. She's learned that animals possess an intuitive understanding of good and evil that humans often lack, an ability to sense danger and malice that can't be explained by science or rational thought. And she's learned that sometimes the dead don't rest until justice has been served, that love and loyalty can transcend death, and that the animals we dismiss as just pets possess a spiritual depth that shame those who underestimate them. Because the animals at Valley Animal Hospital didn't just save Sarah's life, they solved their own murders, ensuring that their killer faced justice, and that no other animals would suffer the same fate. Heroes come in all forms, and sometimes the smallest and most vulnerable among us are the ones with the greatest courage to fight back against the darkness. The scratching sounds in the walls finally stopped after Dr. Martinez was convicted, but visitors to the empty building still report feeling watched by benevolent presences, as if guardian angels with paws and wings are keeping eternal vigil over the place where they died. Some would say that's impossible, that animals don't have souls or spirits. But Sarah knows better. She knows that love creates connections that death can't break, and that sometimes the purest hearts are the ones beating in the chests of creatures who love unconditionally and forgive endlessly. Even in death, they were still trying to save lives. Let's move to our 11th and final story. Thomas Kane had worked security at dozens of facilities over his 15-year career, but Riverside State Hospital was supposed to be his easiest assignment yet. The main psychiatric facility was still operational, bustling with staff and patients during the day. But the old East Wing had been abandoned for 6 years. His job was simple: Patrol the empty wing twice per night. Check that vandals hadn't broken in, and make sure the demolition crew's equipment remained secure. The East Wing was scheduled to be torn down in 2 months to make room for a new outpatient treatment center. For now, it stood as a monument to outdated mental health care. Long corridors lined with small rooms that had once housed patients under conditions that modern medicine had rightfully rejected. Most of the medical equipment had been removed, but the bones of the institution remained. Steel doors with observation windows, restraint points built into the walls, and the heavy silence that seemed to permeate places where desperate people had spent their final days. Thomas had been patrolling the East Wing for 3 weeks without incident. The building was secure, quiet, and mercifully free of the homeless populations that sometimes took shelter in abandoned structures. It was the kind of assignment that let him catch up on podcasts and online courses while earning decent money for minimal work. But tonight, someone was waiting for him. Thomas first noticed the signs during his 1 a.m. patrol of the 2nd floor. Someone had been in the building since his last round 6 hours earlier. Not vandals looking for copper wire or drug users seeking shelter, someone who understood the layout of the facility and had been moving through it with purpose. In what used to be the common room, furniture had been arranged in a perfect circle, as if for a group therapy session. The chairs were positioned with mathematical precision, facing inward, creating an intimate space for conversation among people who were no longer there. In the former nurse's station, patient files had been spread across the desk in organized rows. The files were 6 years old, left behind when the wing was closed, but someone had been reading them, taking notes in the margins, updating records for patients who had long since been transferred or discharged. And in room 237, someone had been living. The room showed all the signs of recent habitation: a sleeping bag in the corner, empty food containers neatly stacked by the window, personal hygiene items arranged on the small sink. But it was the walls that made Thomas's blood run cold. Someone had covered every surface with handwritten notes. Not graffiti or random scrawling, but detailed psychiatric observations written in the clinical language of medical professionals. Notes about patient behaviors, treatment responses, medication side effects. All written as if the East Wing was still operational, as if patients were still being housed and treated in rooms that had been empty for years. Thomas pulled out his flashlight and examined the writing more closely. The handwriting was neat, precise, the kind of meticulous documentation that came from years of professional training. But the content was impossible. Patient in 241 showing improved response to lithium therapy. Mood swings decreasing in frequency and intensity. Recommend continued observation. Patient in 235 experienced severe reaction to haloperidol. Switched to risperidone with better results. Family notified of medication change. Patient in 229 attempted self-harm during night shift. Placed on 24-hour suicide watch. Dr. Morrison consulted. The notes were dated from the past 3 weeks, exactly the period Thomas had been working security in the East Wing. Someone had been living in room 237, conducting imaginary psychiatric evaluations of patients who didn't exist, maintaining detailed medical records for a hospital ward that had been closed for 6 years. Thomas radioed the main hospital, but got no response. The East Wing's communication system had been disconnected when the facility closed, and his radio's range didn't extend to the active hospital buildings across the campus. Thomas's training told him to leave the building and call for backup. But his curiosity and 15 years of security experience told him to investigate further. Whoever was living in room 237 might be mentally ill and in need of help rather than dangerous and criminal. Thomas made his way through the abandoned wing, checking each room mentioned in the handwritten notes. In every case, he found evidence that someone had been treating imaginary patients with the dedication and attention of a real medical professional. Room 235 had been set up as a medication distribution center, with empty pill bottles arranged by dosage and frequency. Room 241 had been configured for individual therapy sessions, with 2 chairs facing each other and a notebook filled with session notes written in dialogue format. Room 229 had been modified for suicide watch, with all potentially dangerous items removed and soft materials placed over hard surfaces. Someone had been running a complete psychiatric facility for patients who existed only in their own mind. Thomas found the answers he was looking for in the basement of the East Wing. The lower level had once housed the hospital's records department, pharmacy, and medical supplies. When the wing closed, most equipment had been removed, but some items had been left behind. Outdated computers, old medical textbooks, and filing cabinets full of patient records from the facility's operational years. In the records room, Thomas found a makeshift office where someone had been living and working for months, possibly years. Dozens of patient files were spread across multiple tables, organized by admission date, diagnosis, and treatment status. But mixed in with the legitimate historical records were hundreds of fabricated files for imaginary patients. The fictional files were incredibly detailed, showing the same professional expertise as the historical records. Complete psychiatric evaluations, treatment plans, family histories, medication schedules. Each file told the story of a person struggling with mental illness, receiving care in a facility that no longer existed. And at the center of the makeshift office sat Dr. Eleanor Morrison. Thomas recognized her from the staff photos that still hung in the main corridor of the East Wing. Dr. Morrison had been the chief psychiatrist of the East Wing for 23 years before it closed. According to the official records, she had retired when the facility shut down and moved to Arizona to be near her grandchildren. But Dr. Morrison was sitting at her improvised desk, writing patient notes by flashlight, completely absorbed in her work. She was wearing a white lab coat over civilian clothes, her gray hair pulled back in the same professional style from her staff photo. She looked exactly as she had 6 years ago, as if time had stopped when the East Wing closed. "Dr. Morrison?" Thomas called out softly. She looked up from her notes, unsurprised to see him. "Oh, hello, Thomas. I was wondering when you'd find me down here. You've been very thorough in your security rounds." "Dr. Morrison, what are you doing here?" "My job," she replied simply. "Taking care of my patients. They need continuous monitoring, you know. Mental illness doesn't follow a schedule." Thomas looked around the basement office, understanding the full scope of what he was seeing. Dr. Morrison had never left Riverside State Hospital. When the East Wing closed, she had simply moved into the abandoned building and continued working, creating imaginary patients to replace the real ones who had been transferred. The patients were moved to other facilities 6 years ago, Thomas said gently. "Were they?" Dr. Morrison asked, gesturing toward the files covering her desk. "Because I have 57 patients upstairs who need their medications adjusted, their therapy sessions scheduled, their families notified of progress. They can't be moved, Thomas. This is their home." Thomas realized that Dr. Morrison was experiencing some form of dementia or psychotic break, unable to accept that her life's work had ended when the facility closed. She'd been living in the basement, maintaining elaborate fantasies about continuing to treat patients who no longer existed. "Dr. Morrison, I'm going to call someone to help you," Thomas said, reaching for his cell phone. "You can't," Dr. Morrison replied, her voice taking on a more urgent tone. The patients need me. If I leave, who will monitor their medications? Who will conduct their therapy sessions? Who will protect them from the people who want to shut us down? Thomas saw that Dr. Morrison's delusion was complete and encompassing. In her mind, the East Wing was still operational. Her patients were still upstairs, and outside forces were threatening to close the facility. She'd been living in this fantasy for years, sustained by her professional dedication and unable to accept the reality of retirement. The hospital administration knows I'm here, Dr. Morrison continued. They approved my continued residency to maintain continuity of care during the transition period. Thomas knew that no such arrangement existed, but he also knew that confronting Dr. Morrison's delusions directly might make her more agitated and unpredictable. "Why don't you show me your patients?" Thomas suggested. "I'd like to understand the work you're doing here." Dr. Morrison's eyes lit up with professional pride. "Of course. I should introduce you to everyone. It's important that security personnel understand our patients' specific needs and behavioral patterns." For the next hour, Dr. Morrison led Thomas through the abandoned East Wing, stopping at each room to provide detailed briefings on the imaginary patients housed there. She spoke with the authority and compassion of someone who had devoted her life to mental health care, describing treatment plans and therapeutic breakthroughs for people who existed only in her deteriorating mind. In room 225, she introduced Thomas to Margaret, a 70-year-old woman with severe depression who was responding well to a new antidepressant regimen. In room 238, she presented the case of David, a young man with bipolar disorder who was learning to manage his condition through a combination of medication and cognitive behavioral therapy. Each imaginary patient had a complete history, a comprehensive treatment plan, and a future that Dr. Morrison was carefully managing with the dedication of someone who still believed her work could save lives. "They trust me, Doctor," Morrison explained as they completed their rounds. "After 6 years, we've built relationships that can't be replaced. If they were transferred to other facilities, they'd have to start over with new doctors who don't understand their histories." Thomas realized that Dr. Morrison's fantasy served a dual purpose. It allowed her to continue the work that had defined her identity, and it protected her from the grief of losing her patients and her purpose when the facility closed. But living alone in an abandoned psychiatric hospital, maintaining elaborate delusions about imaginary patients, was slowly killing her. Dr. Morrison was thin, pale, and clearly malnourished. She'd been surviving on canned food and bottled water, avoiding contact with the outside world to maintain her fantasy. "Dr. Morrison," Thomas said carefully, "what if I told you that your patients could receive better care at the new facilities? Modern equipment, updated treatment methods, specialized staff." Dr. Morrison's expression became suspicious. "You're one of them, aren't you? One of the administrators who wants to close us down. I should have known when they assigned a new security guard." Thomas realized he was walking a dangerous line. If Dr. Morrison became convinced that he was a threat to her imaginary patients, she might react with the protective instincts that had sustained her delusion for 6 years. "I'm not trying to close anything," Thomas assured her. "I just want to make sure everyone gets the best possible care." "The best possible care is here, Doctor," Morrison insisted, "where patients are treated as individuals, not case numbers, where therapy isn't rushed because of insurance limitations, where people can heal at their own pace without being pushed out to make room for new admissions." Thomas understood that Dr. Morrison's delusions were rooted in legitimate criticisms of modern mental health care. She'd spent decades watching budget cuts reduce staff, shorten treatment times, and prioritize profit over patient outcomes. The fantasy of the East Wing allowed her to practice medicine the way she believed it should be practiced, without the constraints that had limited her effectiveness in the real world. But fantasy was killing her, and Thomas knew he had to find a way to connect her with reality without destroying her psychologically. That's when Thomas made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of calling for immediate help, instead of forcing Dr. Morrison to confront the reality of her situation, Thomas decided to become part of her delusion. Just for one night. Just long enough to understand what she needed and figure out how to help her. "Dr. Morrison," Thomas said, "I think there might be a way to ensure your patients get the care they need. But I need you to help me understand exactly what they require." Dr. Morrison's suspicion melted into relief. "Of course. That's exactly what we need. Someone in administration who understands the clinical side of our work." For the next 3 hours, Thomas listened as Dr. Morrison described her treatment philosophies, her concerns about patient welfare, and her detailed plans for improving the facility. She was brilliant, compassionate, and completely detached from reality. But her expertise was real, her dedication genuine, and her love for her imaginary patients heartbreaking. As dawn approached, Thomas knew he had to make the call that would end Dr. Morrison's fantasy forever. "Dr. Morrison," he said gently, "I need to contact the main hospital to discuss your patients' futures. Will you trust me to do what's best for them?" Dr. Morrison nodded, exhausted by the long night of patient consultations. "I trust you, Thomas. You understand what we're trying to accomplish here." Thomas called 911, requesting medical assistance for an elderly woman experiencing psychiatric distress. He stayed with Dr. Morrison until the paramedics and psychiatric evaluation team arrived, holding her hand as she slowly began to realize that her 6-year fantasy was ending. "My patients," she whispered as they prepared to transport her to the main hospital. "Who will take care of my patients?" "They'll be safe," Thomas promised, though they both knew there were no patients to protect. Dr. Morrison was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease complicated by prolonged isolation and delusional thinking. She was placed in a memory care facility where she received the same compassionate treatment she had provided to thousands of patients during her career. The East Wing of Riverside State Hospital was demolished 2 months later. But not before Thomas spent hours documenting Dr. Morrison's imaginary patient files. He donated them to a medical school as examples of thorough psychiatric documentation, ensuring that her professional expertise would continue to educate future doctors. Thomas left security work after the incident and became an advocate for elderly mental health patients, inspired by Dr. Morrison's dedication and horrified by the isolation that had driven her to create an elaborate fantasy world. But the experience taught him something important about the nature of reality and the power of human connection. Dr. Morrison's patients weren't real, but her love for them was. Her treatment plans weren't necessary, but her expertise was genuine. Her delusions weren't healthy, but they came from a place of profound compassion for people who were suffering. Here's what Thomas wants everyone who hears this story to remember. If you work alone at night, especially in isolated or emotionally charged environments, don't ignore the warning signs of psychological distress. Isolation can make anyone vulnerable to delusions, depression, and dangerous disconnection from reality. Check on your coworkers. Notice when someone seems to be struggling. Don't dismiss concerns about mental health as weakness or failure. And if you encounter someone like Dr. Morrison, someone whose reality has become distorted by trauma, loss, or isolation, remember that their delusions often contain kernels of truth about real problems in our world. The imaginary patients weren't real, but the healthcare system's failures that drove Dr. Morrison to create them were very real indeed. Sometimes the most disturbing horror stories aren't about monsters or supernatural threats. Sometimes they're about good people who lose their way in the darkness and need someone to help them find the light again. Because in the end, we're all just trying to take care of each other, whether our patients are real or imaginary, whether our work matters to anyone else, whether anyone notices when we disappear into the shadows of our own making. The scariest thing about working the night shift isn't what might be lurking in the darkness. It's what might be lurking in our own minds when we're left alone with our thoughts for too long. So look out for each other. Check on the people who work alone. And remember that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear security uniforms and spend their nights making sure the rest of us can sleep safely. Because every one of these stories could have ended differently if someone had been paying attention, if someone had cared enough to ask the right questions, if someone had refused to ignore the warning signs that something was terribly wrong. Don't let the next story be about someone you could have helped.